Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable, see playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 361, The Blood Vigor of a Nine-Headed Dragon. The disciples from Cloud Hall at the base of the cliff were stunned by Zen's astounding performance. They had imagined many possible ways to withstand that flame, but nobody had ever thought that someone would dare to and be able to pass through it in this way. It seems that his body is immune to fire. Gosh, I didn't know there was something like this in this world. Some disciples couldn't help but blurt out in astonishment. Lennon, who was standing on a rock, fell silent as he stared at Zen. He revealed no emotion on his face, it was as if he were numb with shock. As a disciple of Cloud Hall, he knew how difficult it was to reach each of those treasure chests. According to the tales he had heard, the one who had been the furthest was the head of the Cloud Hall who had managed to reach a silver treasure chest. Now, Zen was about to succeed in opening a blue treasure chest. It was highly likely that Zen would reach the silver ones next. Lennon thought, but, he is just at the third grade of the nature level. Does it mean that he has greater potential than me? Lennon understood that he was no match for Frank, but he could hardly convince himself that he was weaker than this young man from a grade 2 sect. Immediately, Lennon felt his heart flooding with many complex emotions, including resentment and reluctance. It was difficult for him to accept this fact. The flame on the cliff was being belched out by a magical device, but it couldn't threaten Zen as his body was covered with gold runes. All that he needed to look out for was the second phase attack in this cave, the huge fireball. That man in a cloak had been chased away by that huge fireball after he passed the flame, and Zen wouldn't repeat the mistake. The flame gradually went out as he moved on. Zen became more cautious as he knew that the second phase attack was imminent. Unlike the man in the cloak who had approached the treasure chest rashly, Zen was calm and composed as he stared at the cave. Those who tried to chance their luck usually lacked confidence in themselves, and that was why their efforts would fail. If that guy in the cloak had tried his best and employed all of his means when he confronted the fireball, he might have managed to get the treasure. Zen stopped at a distance from the treasure chest. He held the streamer sword in his hand and created 6 demonic phantoms around his body. Although his demonic phantom wasn't his most powerful means, it was useful on many different occasions and was convenient to use. As soon as the flame disappeared, a ray of red light shone from inside the cave. After that, Zen heard the sound of a rolling rock coming from in front. Bang! With a loud rumble, a huge fireball appeared out of the blue and shot toward Zen with unstoppable momentum. The platform on which Zen stood was very narrow while the rolling fireball was as tall as Zen. There was no place for him to hide at all. With the huge fireball approaching him quickly, Zen directed the 6 demonic phantoms to fly toward the fireball, one after another. Boom! The first phantom shattered as soon as it collided with the fireball. Boom! The second disappeared as well. Boom! And then, the third. Boom! 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 Zen's demonic phantoms were very powerful, but they were as fragile as porcelain in front of the fireball and quickly fell apart. The inability of the demonic phantoms to stop the fireball didn't trouble Zen much. He had already achieved his purpose of using those phantoms to slow down the fireball. With a sharp glint in his eyes, Zen then let out an enthusiastic shout and lifted his sword. His body was bursting with the power from the dragon scales, and his figure grew in size and strength because of that. Stop here. Break now. Flick the sword. Zen's streamer sword shone brightly as it filled with his life vitality. It yielded tremendous power as Zen swung it at the fireball. Even though there was a hill in front of Zen, it would crumble under his powerful attack. The inside of the fireball was a round rock that was as hard as iron. It rolled toward Zen with great momentum but was eventually stopped by his sword. Zen was pushed back several feet by the fireball, but he quickly managed to steady himself. He yelled again in excitement. At the same time, he tightened his grip on the sword and swung it. With a snapping sound, a crack appeared on the surface of the rock. The crack spread and soon, the fireball split into numerous smaller pieces and flew in different directions. Fragments of the rock kept burning as they fell from the platform and onto the base of the cliff. The disciples below cried out with fear when they saw that and scattered in all directions to avoid those fragments. I made it. Zen felt his heart beating with excitement, and his face beamed with pleasure. He returned his streamer sword into his space ring and sauntered toward the blue treasure chest. He could almost feel the envious glare of the other disciples and the resentment flooding their hearts. Zen slowed his pace purposely as if he was enjoying that wonderful moment before he opened the treasure chest. He wanted to annoy the Cloud Hall disciples. Anyhow, the platform was only 7 or 8 meters in length, and Zen soon reached the treasure chest and put his hand on it. Although he was excited, Zen's enthusiasm grew by leaps and bounds when he actually touched the treasure chest. He thought, the red treasure chest at the lowest rank contained a valuable drug that could strengthen my soul. What will the blue treasure chest hold? Suddenly, a snapping sound came from inside the treasure chest. After that, it started to shake severely. Oh my goodness, what's this? Zen was taken by surprise by the sudden change and moved one step back. He thought a fierce beast was about to rush out and attack him. In the next second, the treasure chest opened by itself. A red shadow popped out from inside and lunged at Zen. Without a second thought, Zen lowered himself as soon as possible and tried to dodge it. However, the red shadow moved quicker than him. Although it failed at its first attempt, the shadow quickly changed its direction in the air and rushed at Zen again. It moved like a living creature full of fresh vigor. It was too late for Zen to escape this time. He could only watch helplessly as the red shadow flew toward his chest and merged with his heart. The instant before the red shadow entered Zen's body, he saw its shape. The shape reminded Zen of a creature he had met in the past. Zen had encountered some 9-headed snakes when he was in the fairy palace. This thing in front of him looked the same as those creatures, although it was only a shadow made of blood. After the blood shadow disappeared in his body, Zen felt as though his heart had stopped. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Soon 30 seconds passed by, but Zen still didn't regain his heartbeat. An ordinary person would have been at death's door when his heart stopped beating for such a long time, but Zen only felt as though his body was in a peculiar state. After staying still for a while, a loud sound was heard as his heart began to beat again. Lub, lub, lub dub. His heartbeat was so loud that all the disciples of the Cloud Hall below could hear it clearly. Zen's heartbeat had to have been tremendously powerful as it could be heard from such a long distance. All the other disciples at the base of the cliff looked up at Zen with stunned expressions. Louis licked his lips and shook his head before spitting enviously, "Dang it. I would have tried my best if I had known that there was such good stuff inside the treasure chest. I would have got it if I hadn't given up." He felt very regretful. There were many other trials in Cloud Road, so he wanted to hide some tricks up his sleeve. After all, his main goal was to pass the Cloud Road test. However, he hadn't expected that the treasure inside the blue chest could strengthen a cultivator's vigor. He had seen the process, and he knew that Zen's heart had become much stronger after the blood shadow merged with him. Fernandez shook his head as he watched the scene in the picture slab. He said, "Goodness, it's a blood vigor of a 9-headed dragon. What's more, it's a mature 9-headed dragon. Does this remind you of something?" Elder Osmond used to be chased by an enemy who cut his hands in their fight. He ran away at full speed and evaded the enemy. After 3 days, when he returned, his hands had recovered. Although his new hands were still weaker than the ones he lost, he managed to kill his enemy with a surprise attack. Kenneth nodded at Fernandez's question before sharing the story. He was Osmond's best friend, and so, he remembered this matter. We all know that Osmond has a powerful vigor, but few of us know that it's due to this treasure inside the blue treasure chest. The blood vigor of the 9-headed dragon can strengthen the vigor of a cultivator. Zen is fortunate enough to get it. The head of the Auspice sect said with a sigh. He felt it was a pity that Louis didn't get it. Fernandez smiled and said, "Well, maybe it's just a part of it. I bet that Zen is unsatisfied even though he has the blood vigor. His next goal is the silver treasure chest." The head of Cloud Hall was the only one to open a silver treasure chest. "I wonder whether Zen will also get it." "Huh, are you kidding?" Lady Long interrupted with a cold sneer, "It is just dumb luck that he reached the blue one. You say that he still wants to open a silver one. Maybe in his next life." "What do you mean by that, lady? Zen didn't do anything wrong to irritate you, nor did he contend against Frank, your disciple's fiancé. Why do you keep making disparaging comments about him? Do you think that I, the head of Cloud Sect, am deaf to your words?" Kenneth shouted with fury. He had tried to endure Lady Long's sarcasm, but he couldn't contain his temper anymore. Chapter 362, The Puppet Killer. There was only a picture slab outside the Cloud Road, and whenever Frank and her disciple, Lois, appeared in the slab, Lady Long would be all smiles and praises for them. She regarded Frank as though he were her son, whereas she treated the other disciples participating in the Cloud Road like they were worthless. Besides, in her opinion, only Lois was qualified to stand beside Frank. As an elder of Cloud Hall, Fernandez was quite familiar with all the disciples of Cloud Hall. He knew of Frank's and Lennon's skills and background. Naturally, his focus was on other disciples, such as Zen, Louis, Roche, Patrick, and a few others who performed outstandingly well in the test. Funnily enough, whenever Zen appeared on the picture slab, Lady Long could not help but disparage him. It would be fine if she only expressed her contempt for Zen once or twice. After all, she was a woman, not only of bad temper but also of great strength. It was unexpected for Lady Long to have a deep prejudice against Zen, and for her to belittle Zen every time. How could Kenneth tolerate her irrational behavior? When Kenneth finally spoke up, the other sect leaders felt greatly elated and applauded him secretly. Although Lady Long's caustic remarks were mostly directed at Zen, she was also rude to the other disciples. This, of course, had triggered dissatisfaction among the other sect leaders, but they all held their anger like Kenneth before. Humph, what's the future for a guy from that little place in the east? Eastern region, humph, how can you call that place a region? How ridiculous, what are you staring at? Yes, I'm criticizing the eastern region as well. Zen has already offended Lennon, which is tantamount to provoking the union of the Wang clan and the Zhao clan. What will he achieve in the future? How ignorant and stupid he is. I think Louis is smarter than Zen. At least he covered his face when he robbed the treasure chest, sneered Lady Long, knocking her cane on the ground. Kenneth, who was a forthright and impetuous man, appreciated Zen's courage to fight Lennon openly. So he protested against Lady Long, not caring about the consequences. What's so great about the union of the Wang clan and the Zhao clan? He argued gallantly after a short laugh. The fact that someone offends the South Wang Zhao family doesn't mean the person has to worry about severe consequences instead of continuing with their practice. The union of the Wang clan and the Zhao clan is significant. However, they will be a third-grade family. Lady Long, don't forget that our Cloud Hall is a force at grade 4. Can a member of this big family suppress an elite from Cloud Hall? You're overestimating the union. You boosted the morale of the other side and lowered our own. Lady Long, are you still a member of Cloud Hall? When did I endorse another side and lower our own? Lady Long snapped back. Kenneth intended to use Cloud Hall's power to put pressure on Lady Long. If Zen successfully passed the Cloud Road, he would become an elite disciple of Cloud Hall, and then he would naturally be given sanctuary in Cloud Hall. Besides, a fourth-grade sect, of course, didn't fear a third-grade family. You were rambling about the consequences Zen would face for provoking Lennon. What, will you now deny what you just said? Kenneth questioned, twisting his lips into a sneer. Lady Long was speechless. Just then, Fernandez stopped their argument. Enough, he shouted. Stop arguing about this little thing. Zen is going to reach the third treasure chest. As these words were spoken, Kenneth's and Lady Long's eyes flew to the picture slab at the same time. Kenneth knew how hard it was to obtain a silver chest, but he had a hunch that Zen might be able to open it. In the All Peaks competition, Zen exceeded everyone's expectations in every contest and eventually won. Kenneth thought he would succeed this time, too. At this point, however, Zen felt an excruciating pain in his chest. Ever since the blood-red 9-headed dragon penetrated Zen's heart, every heartbeat seemed to hit him like a sledgehammer. In other words, every time his heart beat, he felt a sharp pain, which was almost unbearable. In addition, when Zen's heart thumped wildly, the blood vigor of the 9-headed dragon in his body flowed continuously to various parts of his body. This pain was in addition to the pressure he felt in his heart. His heart raced dozens of times before the pounding subsided, and the force of the hammering gradually faded away. This meant that Zen had absorbed the 9-headed dragon's blood vigor. The force of vital energy and blood billowed in Zen's body. It made his vital energy and blood surge like waves. Zen suddenly sensed that he had boundless power. At this point, he, of course, became aware of the value of the 9-headed dragon's blood vigor. When Zen was in the Burning Sky Palace of the Eastern region, the third prince had offered 3 gorgeous women. These women were from the yin group and had powerful vital energy and blood in their bodies. By taking their virginity energy, one could acquire the power of their vital energy and blood, which was a great benefit for cultivators. Zen speculated that the power of the 3 stunning women's vital energy and blood was probably less than a tenth of the power of the 9-headed dragon's blood vigor. Many cultivators were eager to secure the virginity energy of the 3 beauties at that time. Zen wondered how desperate they would be to possess the 9-headed dragon's blood vigor, and what would be its value. Zen was sure that their yearning for it was beyond belief. When his heart rate returned to normal, Zen decided to move on without a break. What was in the silver treasure chest? Zen couldn't help wondering about the contents of the treasure chest. After all, when the prize in the blue treasure chest was so precious, the contents of the silver treasure chest would be even more valuable. Zen climbed the cliff slowly. The cliff was so rocky that there was no shortage of places to put hands and feet, so it was not difficult to climb. After selecting a silver treasure chest, Zen walked toward the stone platform. I must get the silver treasure chest, Zen murmured as he stood on the stone platform. A determined look flashed in his eyes. He knew that taking the silver treasure chest would be far more dangerous and difficult than getting a blue one. Faced with an unknown challenge, Zen was on his guard and focused on the dark cave. Clank, 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 a rhythmic, crashing sound came from the cave. It seemed as though something was about to emerge from it. Zen was not the only one who was nervous. All the onlookers wanted to know what test he would have to pass to get the silver treasure chest in the 3rd tier. Lennon remained motionless. He stared intently at the platform where Zen was standing. According to his strength, the goal Lennon set for himself was to reach the silver treasure chest in the 3rd tier. The leader of Cloud Hall had taken a silver treasure chest in the 3rd tier. Although it was impossible for him to become a powerful leader simply from the prize in the silver treasure chest, if Lennon obtained the silver chest, it would show that he was as gifted as the leader of Cloud Hall. To become an elite disciple would be a great honor and provide him with considerable resources. If he had the same talent as the leader of Cloud Hall, who would dare to ignore him? Thus, Lennon observed intently, unwilling to overlook a single detail. If he could grasp these details and figured out how to deal with them, his chances of winning the silver treasure chest would increase by at least 30%. In this sense, Zen climbing the cliff first actually benefited Lennon. At least Zen's exploration of each tier was a demonstration for Lennon. However, this didn't mean that Lennon forgave Zen. On the contrary, he hated Zen's guts. Lennon hoped that Zen would make the most of his power so he would know what danger was in the 3rd tier. But he didn't want Zen to make it through and get the silver treasure chest. In short, Lennon had complicated feelings and thoughts about this situation. Clank, clank, the noise grew louder, and soon, a strange thing appeared at the mouth of the cave. Is this a puppet? Zen mumbled. It was hard for him to define what it was. It looked like a puppet made of pillars. Zen couldn't think of anything to compare it to. Given that it could move automatically and didn't breathe like a living creature, Zen could only call it a puppet. But the puppet's arms and legs were made of shiny metal pillars, at the end of which there were no hands or feet but sharp blades that gleamed in the cold light. Obviously, these blades were of high-grade material. Besides, its head, shoulders, and many other parts also had a lot of blades. Apparently, this puppet was made for killing. It was a puppet killer. As soon as the puppet exited the cave, it rushed towards Zen. With every step it took, the blades on its feet were driven deep into the stone platform. As it quickly approached Zen, its thin and metal column torso suddenly began to spin. In the same instant, its arms also rotated at high speed, like a windmill, trying to injure Zen. What should I do to deal with it? Zen whispered as he racked his brain. Puppets didn't have weaknesses as human beings did. Zen reckoned that the puppet would have a core to power it, so he just needed to smash that core. The problem was that Zen didn't have much time to observe the puppet and find its core. At this moment, he was standing on the edge of the platform, and if he could not withstand the puppet's first attack, Zen would fall off the cliff and lose the test. Its waste. Excitement flickered in his eyes as Zen abruptly bent down like a tiger that was readying itself to attack its prey. This ready stance of attack was called the crawling tiger move. When the puppet rushed forward, Zen kicked his feet off the ground like a pouncing tiger. At the same time, he pushed his streamer sword horizontally. The puppet's waist was a long, slim iron pillar. Zen felt confident that he could cut it off with this move. Chapter 363, When All Hope Was Lost. Using his strength, Zen waved the streamer sword to create silver shadows and cut through the puppet's waist. Ting! It was a good hit. But unexpectedly, Zen didn't even scratch the puppet's body. It seemed to be made of some hard metals. Zen could feel his hands becoming a little numb from the sword's vibration. It's so tough. Even a fairy weapon can't cut it. Before Zen could wave his sword for the second time, the puppet started to move. Its body slightly tilted, and the rapidly rotating blades rushed towards Zen. Two blades were too fast for the naked eyes to see. They almost looked like silver plates that reflected too much light. Ping! In the face of the incoming knives, Zen stepped back swiftly. He rolled to the ground, barely avoiding the attack of the puppet. He thought he was safe, but to his surprise, the puppet started to make the knives cut through the ground. It was aiming to cut the platform into two so Zen would fall. The puppet was too smart, as if it had a mind of its own. Usually, a human-made puppet could only follow the simplest instruction. It would get confused if the instruction was a little complicated. But this puppet was different. After it forced Zen back, he knew to cut the platform to make Zen fall off. Apparently, it had the ability to think. Zen didn't have much time to think about it. His main objective now was not to fall off the platform, not because he was afraid of the disciples from Cloud Hall waiting for him outside the enchanted barrier, but because he wouldn't get the silver box if he fell. Moreover, Zen also wanted to try for the gold boxes above. He wasn't sure if he'd make it to the black box, but it was worth the try. He would not give up once there was a chance. Zen was not too ambitious and had a good attitude. He was always determined to give his best to seize any opportunity. But if after all his effort he could still not obtain it, that meant that he wasn't strong or lucky enough. Zen would always accept defeat humbly. Take for example the fairy place hidden in the eastern region. Apparently, it was a very good chance for Zen. However, he was only the temporary owner of it. If Zen would really become the owner of it, he could benefit much more. But he didn't insist further because he knew his strength and capacity. It was important to do something hard, but sometimes self-consciousness was more crucial. Today was different though. He felt that he had a chance on this one, so there was no way he would let it pass without giving it a try. The puppet was still cutting the platform. Zen heard a harsh sound and saw rubble flying in all directions. With the current pace of the puppet, the part stretching out of the cliff had already been cut in half. And if the puppet continued with its pace, the platform would soon fall off due to its own weight. Stop cutting! 6 demonic phantoms rushed towards the puppet from different directions. Zen knew that the puppet's body was strong, and his 6 demonic phantoms might not stand a chance, but at least they could stop the puppet from cutting. 6 loud bangs echoed. Just as Zen expected, his demonic phantoms hit the puppet like they were eggs smashing the stone. The material used to make the puppet was surely the hardest Zen had ever seen. If the puppet could be sold outside the Cloud Road, the price would be exorbitantly high. While the 6 demonic phantoms were hitting the puppet, Zen put the streamer sword into the rotating silver plate in hope of stopping the windmill. Crash! The streamer sword went through the silver plate. The sword's tip part got stuck in the puppet's waist and the middle part had barely stopped the knives from rotating. The force of the knives rotating had resulted in the streamer sword to be deformed. With his fairy weapon deformed, Zen felt bad, but he had no choice. The puppet was too hard to be cut, and it was also so smart. Just as when Zen struck the puppet's body with his sword, the puppet's metal column started to reshape itself. It turned longer and shorter simultaneously. 2 long metal sticks suddenly stretched out from its legs. With 3 knives on each top of the sticks, they looked like paws. The paws then swiftly moved towards Zen, and in a matter of seconds, Zen's legs were locked. Splish! Splish! Zen's ankles were trapped by the paws. The knives started to cut Zen's skin and almost reached his bones. He was bleeding so badly. This was the first time that Zen was hurt after he entered the Cloud Road. Zen's body was a top-grade spiritual weapon, which meant that normal attack could not hurt him. But these paws were different because Zen could be injured. He was just lucky that his bones were stronger than his muscles and the knives could not cut his bones. If it was another disciple, the bones in his feet would surely be cut into pieces. But despite that, the situation was becoming too bad and dangerous. Zen could not move because his feet were locked. Before Zen could move his arms, another 2 sticks started to stretch out from the puppet's shoulders. Splish! Splish! Now, the second pair of paws trapped Zen's wrists. They were digging through Zen's flesh. Blood started to squirt out of Zen's wrists until his wrists were covered in blood. Zen was now completely locked and unable to move. He appeared to be a fish on a chopping board ready to be cut down into pieces. The puppet seemed to know that a normal attack would not work on Zen. A sharp object spiked out of the puppet's chest and it rotated fast, aiming for Zen's chest. Seeing what was happening, the Cloud Hall disciples waiting outside the enchanted barrier were stunned. They could not talk, holding their breath in fear. It was too thrilling. The Cloud Hall disciples thought that the test would be easy for them. Everything went smooth in the beginning. They didn't face any dangerous situations even when they passed through the sea of raging fire. They also defeated the ghost-faced spiders easily at the start of the hidden trial. With their consecutive wins, they felt that the Cloud Road was not as difficult as it was said to be. It was easy to pass the trial with skills alone, however one also needed chances and good luck. Challenges came with chances and good luck. If a disciple didn't try to seize these chances, it was like they found a treasure but didn't take anything. Any disciple wouldn't want that to happen. But seeing what was happening to Zen, they understood that if they were not strong enough, they wouldn't have a chance for the treasures. They would only be miserable. Looking at the powerful puppet, Lennon just shook his head. On one hand, he felt happy seeing Zen suffer. On the other hand, he had to accept the fact that he would have died earlier than Zen if he had climbed the third platform. Outside the trial field, Kenneth was silently staring at the picture slab. His face was dark and cold like iron. The Cloud Road was a dangerous place. Once the disciples were in danger, there was nothing their leaders could do but watch. The other leaders of the sects knew that Kenneth was feeling bad right now. Even Lady Long, who had always spoken sarcastically to Kenneth, was speechless. She dared not to say anything bad to Kenneth, afraid that the latter would turn his anger to her. Deep down, Lady Long felt happy at the turn of events. Zen was eager to reach the third platform with his limited strength. Who could stop him? But with his current level, there was no way he could succeed before the others. However, he insisted on attending the hidden trial and wanted to obtain extra good chances. He seemed to be ignorant at what he could achieve being only at the third grade of the nature level. Fernandez sighed while shaking his head. With its purplish metallic color, I can tell that the puppet is made of purple dark iron. This material is used to make extremely hard top-grade fairy weapons. It will be impossible for Zen to break out from the puppet. Seeing Kenneth's pale white face, Fernandez didn't say more. He could only say much and only hope that Zen had other methods to escape from the puppet and jumped off the platform. In such a situation, no one had thought about the silver box at the other end of the platform. They were all focused on Zen and wondered if he could escape. Even if he obtained the box, there would be no use if he was already dead. Could Zen escape from the puppet? Or was it his end? Meanwhile, Zen was thinking hard. After all he'd been through, he wouldn't let a puppet kill him. With all his limbs trapped, he had no choice. Out of the blue, Zen shouted. As his voice echoed, all his energy burst out. All the dragon scales on his body lit up simultaneously and raging power filled his body in a second. Then Zen was trying to shrink his body despite the pain. He was too desperate to escape from the puppet regardless of the consequences. It was all or nothing for him now. But the puppet remained still. From there, Zen realized the huge gap between his power and the puppet's. He felt like a kid trying to kick down a sturdy tree. It was hopeless. At that moment, Zen felt like he could do nothing. His eyes lay on the ground and suddenly, his eyes lit up. He noticed that the puppet fixed itself on the ground by planting knives into the platform. Zen wasn't sure of his plan, but it was the best he had right now. There was no loss in trying after all. For the first time, he stopped struggling and lay down on the ground calmly. Chapter 364, Space Teleportation. In the past, Zen didn't absorb all the heavenly essence because he had already decided to sell the rest of these to accumulate more cubic crystals. When he was in the eastern region, his strength from more than 100 dragon scales was already sufficient to fight off the few opponents matched against him. He could easily beat his foe whether he was of the same level as Zen or if he was a master of the illuminating soul realm. But at the moment, this strength seemed inadequate for fighting off the puppet. Zen wished he had some idea about the puppet's combat style earlier so he could have absorbed more heavenly essence. If it were only possible to light 500 dragon scales now, or even more, he would be able to tear the puppet into pieces by hand. However, each time Zen thought about his physical strength, he almost always forgot certain considerations. Because of the tremendous strength of dragon scales, the young disciple needed to consider how much of it his body could bear. If his body was unable to withstand the power of 500 dragon scales, he might be torn apart before he could tear his opponent into pieces. Although his body as a spiritual weapon was extremely strong, there was the danger it could collapse if there was too much power in it. Coming back down to earth, Zen couldn't break away from the puppet's claws now, but he noticed one detail about the puppet. It seemed to be fixing itself with only 2 sharp blades on its feet, which meant that it wouldn't be easy for the puppet to stand firmly and keep itself from falling. Looking at the awl as it inched closer to his heart, Zen moved backward with all his strength, and the puppet suddenly began to sway. Then he leaned slightly towards the puppet with a swaying angle, which forced his opponent to pull the 2 sharp blades on its feet out from the stone platform to balance its body. Suddenly, the harsh sound of blades rubbing at the stone platform assaulted Zen's senses. Grabbing Zen's hands, the puppet retreated a few steps and reeled right and left as it took each step, while the sharp blades in its feet bored holes one after another into the stone platform. Standing firmly on the blades was awkward for the puppet, and Zen's intense struggling to escape made it shake even more violently. As the puppet kept on retreating, Zen was getting closer and closer to the silver treasure box, and as soon as he touched this, the combat would be over. And it seemed he was very close to succeeding. What happened next took Zen completely by surprise. When the puppet couldn't hold its balance as it continued to retreat, a long hook suddenly darted out from near its foot and shot straight into the platform. Aside from the hook, there were 2 spikes at its end that were firmly embedded on the stone platform. Dang it, it's... Flustered, Zen couldn't help but let out expletives. When an opponent was so powerful that he couldn't win by strength alone, Zen could only turn to his ingenuity. But under the present circumstances, it was difficult for him to make use of creativity. And the last thing he expected was for the puppet to quickly figure out a way to deal with the situation. This puppet is very smart. Does it have inherent wisdom? Zen wondered. Or, is there a human soul behind it? The young disciple remembered a servant named Saul in the fairy palace. He was also a puppet but with a living soul in him. More significant was the fact that Saul made 3 puppets and implanted these with human souls when he was grounded in the fairy palace for a long time. Since the technology for implanting human souls into puppets existed in the fairy palace, Zen thought it might also be in use in Cloud Road. But at this time, it made no difference to Zen even if he figured out that there was a human soul in this puppet. After regaining its balance, the puppets all began to buzz again and headed straight into Zen's chest. How can I avoid this all? Zen murmured, his brows furrowed tightly as he thought of his predicament. During critical moments, such as life and death situations, keeping calm was necessary because only a clear mind would recognize opportunities that opened in an instant. So, Zen took a deep breath to keep himself calm. He knew that death would come faster to those who panicked. There was a glimmer of hope when Zen took advantage of the puppet's temporary instability and pushed it several steps away. But the audience was disheartened once the puppet was able to position itself securely on the platform. At that moment, they thought the young disciple would be dead soon. There was no possibility of escape for Zen when the puppet firmly locked him on the stone platform. Everyone who watched couldn't figure out what else Zen could do to escape the puppet. All of a sudden, Zen caught a glimpse of a black line not far from his right hand. These black lines were visible everywhere in the broken space of Cloud Road. The Cloud Road had begun to shatter, and this space was no longer as solid as the world. Also, several flaws were becoming evident. In time, these space flaws would eventually become space cracks after thousands of years, and by then, the Cloud Road would likely fall apart and break into pieces. However, Zen was unaware that these black lines were the weakness of space, nor did he know of the space flaws. What he did know was that by using these lines, he could perform an act of teleportation. Before he stepped foot on Cloud Road, Zen had been able to comprehend some of the space law, so he could see the black lines and tried moving along these lines. He knew that he was not technically moving then but was teleporting himself with the help of these lines. Teleportation using the space rules referred to the act of disappearing from one place then appearing in another location almost instantly. And when Zen moved using these lines, he was actually teleporting through space. He was thrilled by the fact that it took him almost no time to move from the front of the line to the end. And as excited as Zen was with this magical way of moving, he thought it was not practical at the moment. The main reason for this was because he had to rely on these black lines if he wanted to teleport. However, the black lines were not long enough to allow him to move far away. The longest black line was only dozens of feet long, while the shortest only measured a few inches. The length of the black line in front of Zen was only 1 foot, although this would be sufficient for him to escape the puppet's claws. With 4 sharp claws firmly gripping Zen's wrists and ankles, it was fortunate that he still had a little room to move. But at that moment, there was hardly time to think of other ways to escape because the awl was less than half a foot away from his heart. If the pointed tool pierced his heart and crushed it, Zen's strength would hardly matter because he was sure to die. Once again, Zen gathered all his strength and unexpectedly stretched out his hand, although it was not enough to reach the black line. There remained a considerable gap between the tips of his fingers and the black line. Only 2 inches away. Come on, you're almost there. By now, the awl was almost on Zen's chest, and its tip had already pierced his skin. Zen felt the power of the tool's constant rotation and penetration. Come on, I can do this. Zen gnashed his teeth as he pushed himself. He was straining so hard to hold out his finger so it would finally reach the black line. The moment Zen touched the black line, his body stretched out and dissolved into thousands of tiny shapes that traveled along with the black line. Finally, he was free of the puppet's claws. The 4 claws used by the puppet to catch Zen all ended up empty as if Zen vanished into thin air. What indeed happened was Zen successfully teleported himself by using the space law that he learned. And while he didn't teleport to a long distance but only 2 feet away, he had escaped the puppet's claws. The puppet was so stunned to see what had just happened that it was rooted to its spot and forgot to attack Zen. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Zen rushed to the silver treasure box without a moment's hesitation. As soon as his hand touched the box, the metallic luster, which made the puppet's structure shimmer, faded slowly. Instantly, the rasping sound of blades rubbing against the stone platform was heard again. The puppet retracted the hook, so its body returned to its original form, and went back to the cave. But as it re-entered the cave, the puppet seemed to turn around and gave Zen a last look. Placing his hand on the silver treasure box, Zen smiled at the puppet and asked, "You are in the puppet, aren't you?" At the question, the sound of blades rubbing the stone platform suddenly stopped. And the puppet halted all of a sudden and stood still. "I know you're in this puppet. If you have any way to release yourself from the puppet, I can help you, as long as you tell me what I can do for you," Zen continued. After a few seconds, the puppet started to move again and walk towards its cave. As long as a human soul remained implanted into a puppet, that person would become indestructible and even immortal. And while it sounded good, it wasn't all that great. After all, living in a puppet was a terrible experience for human beings. At that time, death wasn't what the human soul feared anymore. Instead, what was more dreadful for them was being alive. What came to mind was Saul. Zen remembered how excited Saul was to see him when he got into the fairy palace. The disciple eventually learned from Saul that living as a puppet for tens of millions of years was terrible. So Zen was quite aware of the horrors of living as a puppet. And this made him think that the soul inside this puppet could be having a problem similar to Saul's. Unfortunately, it seemed that this puppet was only programmed to kill, but not communicate with Zen. If indeed there was a human soul inside the puppet, it should be able to communicate with others, unless the soul was also sealed. Ha ha ha, Kenneth broke into laughter. He was standing beneath an arch at the entrance of Cloud Road, shaking in laughter. Joining him in laughter was Fernandez, who shook his head at the same time. Unbelievable, unbelievable, there is always a way out. As soon as he got into the space, Zen had the ability to find these black lines, so he was able to save his life now by taking advantage of it. It's amazing. Zen is one lucky boy. Imagine being able to escape the puppet's clutches. Kenneth excitedly declared. Just a few seconds ago, he believed that Zen would certainly meet his end this time. He didn't expect there to be a space flaw for the young warrior to use. It was fortunate that Zen had mentally grasped the space law and managed to escape from the puppet when he took advantage of this knowledge. Chapter 365, The Inheritance from the Blood Fiend Emperor. For cultivators, destiny was only an illusion. But many cultivators tended to believe in destiny. That was why in the cultivators' world, there had been a profession related to destiny. People engaging in this profession were called destiny masters and they claimed to help cultivators improve their destiny. Nevertheless, most cultivators sneered at destiny masters and thought that all theories about destiny were false. For the lack of a better word, destiny masters were swindlers. Many cultivators spent a great deal of money in hiring destiny masters to better their fate before they took on adventures in some mysterious areas but still were often heard to have died tragically and miserably. Therefore, the existence of destiny was still rather controversial and no definite conclusion had been reached. People in the same rank as Kenneth and Fernandez usually believed in the existence of destiny. But it was impossible for them to find destiny masters who dared not to cheat on them either. Speaking of this, Zen had been able to escape from that puppet's assaults just because of his own destiny. People with good destiny were always not that easy to kill. They could even survive on the verge of death. The sect heads and Fernandez had great admirations for Zen's destiny aside from his success for having gained the silver treasure box. This big world was full of wonders. There were mysterious, dangerous, and ominous places. Despite great dangers, there were great opportunities to be gained from these areas. The higher the risk, the greater the rewards could be. It would all depend on if one would be willing to risk his own life to get the rewards. Some years ago, the head of Cloud Hall opened the silver treasure box. Today, Zen will open one as well, Fernandez said, heaving a long and heavy sigh. Soon enough, he added, I feel that I have to report this to my superior. When Kenneth heard these words out of Fernandez's mouth, his heart got filled with great joy. If Zen could have a great reputation, that only meant more benefits for Kenneth. There was no doubt that Kenneth would benefit more if Zen's performances could arouse the interests of the Cloud Hall head. Standing in front of the silver treasure box, Zen could not hide the excitement on his face. Lennon knew about the value of this silver treasure box, but Zen didn't and had no idea that the first silver treasure box was opened by the Cloud Hall head. Zen only knew that he got the silver treasure box as a fruit of all the hardships he had gone through. He would surely think highly of the treasure chest because it was obtained through hardships and efforts. Clatter. The click of opening the box was like music to Zen's ears. It was the sweetest he had heard so far. Zen was expecting to find inside the box something that he could directly integrate into his body to enhance his physical strengths. But beyond his expectation, he found a dark green jade slip inside. The color suggested that it was made of the purest jade. Is this a rare book about cultivation methods? Zen asked himself, his eyebrows arched up and down out of his curiosity. As he was about to pick up the dark jade slip, Zen felt something strange. Instantly, the jade slip diffused into streaks of dark green light and spiraled up along his arms to his brain. What kind of jade slip is this? How could it penetrate directly into my brain? Muttered Zen. He was totally stunned and felt rather confused. It wasn't the first thing that had infiltrated his brain in the course of the Cloud Road trial. When Zen obtained the red treasure box, he found something black inside it. It was a type of overpowering drug for a soul. Thereafter, he obtained the blue treasure box which contained blood vigor of a 9-headed dragon. Both items were a type of energy that penetrated his brain. However, Zen was surprised to see that the jade slip could diffuse into streaks of green light and slip into his brain. It was the most baffling and confusing thing he had seen in the Cloud Road. After his brain absorbed the diffused jade slip, it was as if all texts of that slip got transferred to his brain. Each word looked deadly desolate and depressed as though each stroke had the ability to kill people. Malicious Wheel of Life and Death. A Tier 5 cultivation method. As Blood Fiend Emperor, I have developed this cultivation method based on what I have comprehended all my life. This cultivation method can drive an enormous amount of malicious aura. It can kill gods and Buddhas. Malicious aura originates from the curses of living creatures. It mustn't be used too. It was a book about a Tier 5 cultivation method. The person who created this cultivation method was known as Blood Fiend Emperor. The name rang a bell, but Zen could not figure out who that man was. However, he was very clear that the word, Emperor, in that person's name had a different meaning from the Emperor of Burning Sky Empire. In a secular world, there was always an emperor that ruled ordinary people. But the term emperor had different meaning in the cultivator's world. The word, emperor, in the Blood Fiend Emperor symbolized the crowning glory for a cultivator. Only leading and top masters were qualified for the title of emperor in the big cultivator's world. Blood Fiend Emperor was an emperor-level master. This land was an ancient relic and Blood Fiend Emperor was perhaps the former owner of this relic. This ancient land was so vast that it was possessed by a top sect. As tens of millions of years passed, the relic had gradually eroded. Zen didn't know if the Blood Fiend Emperor was still alive or not. But at least, the Blood Fiend Emperor had recorded his own cultivation method on the jade slip and placed it here in order that his cultivation method could be further inherited. This jade slip had been stored there for many years. It was so amazing that Zen was the one that had opened this silver treasure box at last. Was a book on the same cultivation method also stored in other silver treasure boxes? The fact was that each silver treasure box contained a jade slip of different cultivation method. All of them were Blood Fiend Emperor's inheritable cultivation methods, but Malicious Wheel of Life and Death was the best one. The head of Cloud Hall had gotten the second best cultivation book, namely the Fiendish Blood Cultivation. So far, this cultivation method had turned into one of the most powerful tactics for the head of Cloud Hall. These dark green jade slips were categorized as soul jade slips because all the characters were engraved by their owner's soul. At that moment, Zen felt like all the words on the jade slip had shown up in his brain. In fact, the soul jade slip was extraordinary. It would be impossible for Zen to write down the cultivation method verbatim from his brain on a piece of paper because of some taboos added to this soul jade slip. Zen would find it difficult to remember the words even if he forced himself to write down the cultivation method. He would either fail to convey the meaning of the cultivation method or wrote it down wrong. Zen would be unable to impart the cultivation method carved on this soul jade slip to anyone else unless he could skillfully cultivate and master it. This jade slip could prevent others from stealthily acquiring Zen's cultivation method. Therefore, even if someone who was far more powerful than Zen showed any interest in this rare book and coerced Zen to write down all content of that cultivation method, it would be highly impossible for Zen to do so. Zen, who had owned a book about a Tier 5 cultivation method, clearly knew how powerful and mighty Tier 5 cultivation methods were. Although he had not thoroughly comprehended the heavenly ogre fist, no one clearly knew how dreadful the demonic life vitality was other than him. By using the demonic life vitality, one was capable of engulfing and possessing others' life vitality. Meanwhile, the demonic phantom was helpful for battling. These amazing effects could be only achieved by people who practiced Tier 5 cultivation methods. In addition, Zen had gone to the Killing Sword Mountain. To acquire, practice, and master the killing way, one would require malicious aura. Now, Zen had stored some malicious aura in the Killing Sword Mountain. To give play to the might of malicious aura, Zen had to practice a cultivation method related to it. Thus, the malicious wheel of life and death proved to be very useful for Zen. Zen badly wished that he could sit down right away to practice the malicious wheel of life and death, but since he was now on the Cloud Road, it was unrealistic for him to cultivate there. It was not until this moment that Zen suddenly felt his hands and feet itchy. Only after this did he notice that the wounds on both his hands and feet were even healing slowly. "Hey, these wounds are healing fast," mumbled Zen out of astonishment. Earlier, that puppet's 4 claws had left large wounds on Zen's wrists and limbs and he never expected the wounds to heal quickly. But now, the blood had started to coagulate, and scabs began to form on the wounds. All this should be attributed to blood vigor of the 9-headed dragon. It was said that even if one head of the dragon was cut off, the dragon could still survive and the head would regenerate. The most amazing gift of it was its ability to regenerate. With the help of his mighty power and blood circulation, Zen physically could recover faster. Thus, his wounds healed more quickly. Letting his wounds heal on their own, he now shifted his attention to his next target, the gold treasure box. But this time, Zen acted more cautiously. He wanted to obtain not only the gold treasure box, but also the black one, because he was now sure that each box had something that would benefit him. Having put his life in danger to obtain the silver treasure box let Zen know what to expect in obtaining the gold and black treasure boxes. He guessed that it would be more difficult to get these boxes. Did he have to take even these 2 boxes? Or would he be contented with the silver box he had just obtained? Chapter 366, The Shadow Wolf King. On the 4th floor, the 2 chests glowed with a dark golden light, tempting the warriors. Their eyes twinkled in a similar fashion. So far in the test of Cloud Road, no one had been able to get their hands on the golden treasure chest. Even head of Cloud Hall was never rewarded with it. The gold treasure box was a great attraction to the other warriors, and Zen also found it particularly alluring. He had received the rewards of 3 treasure boxes up until now. Each reward was greater and rarer than the one that came before it. Consequently, he was better aware of the merits of the treasure chest than the others. The first floor was the reward that could improve one's spirit strength significantly, the second was the blood vigor of the 9-headed dragon, while the third floor was the Blood Fiend Emperor's secret manuscript that described the Tier 5 cultivation method. What kind of a reward did the 4th floor conceal? And what about the 5th? The rewards must be unimaginable. However, Zen was not reckless enough to face the tests of the 4th and the 5th floors. He didn't want to die an early death like most others who challenged them. In order to get the reward of the silver treasure chest, Zen had undertaken great risks. He had almost gotten himself killed. Considering his present strength, he was afraid he would be dead meat if he even attempted to get the reward in the golden box. Treasures, weapons, and cultivation methods were important, but his life was infinitely more vital at the moment. Moreover, Zen's level was still very low. He would always come across more opportunities to achieve the rewards once his level improved. According to Kenneth, The disciples who fell under the third grade of the illuminating soul realm were sanctioned to enter the test of Cloud Road. If he became an elite of Cloud Hall, he might be allowed to re-enter the Cloud Road. After all, Cloud Road came under the purview of Cloud Hall. As long as the rules were stipulated by their men, he would have chances aplenty. Yet, even as Zen chose to abandon the chest at the moment, he was still curious to see what the test of the fourth layer entailed. As he mulled over it, he slowly climbed along the cliff, then leapt to stand on the edge of the fourth stone platform. As he stationed himself there, he saw two red beams of light illuminate the cave. A low but heavy whimper resounded. "Goodness, it's a fierce beast," Zen blurted out. Fear crept up Zen's heart, soon spreading across the rest of his body. At the moment, he felt as if his heart was grabbed by an invisible force. He felt paralyzed, like he was unable to move. What kind of a fierce beast was this? And how did it possess such formidable power? Even while facing the demons in the past, Zen had never been so terrified. Pop pop, pop pop. Zen's heart thundered in his ears. Run, Zen told himself. The prospect of facing some ferocious beast inside the cave made him instinctively want to run away from the stone platform. He wanted to jump down and just escape. Just as he was about to leave the platform, the beast in the cave emerged. It was so fast that Zen only saw the hint of a black shadow race to him, a pair of striking blood-red eyes fixed on his form. The beast rushed at him with the speed of light, and even though Zen had jumped off the platform earlier, the beast still managed to catch up to him. It attempted to slash at him with its front claws. Snap, came the noise of something breaking. The clothes covering Zen's chest were torn apart. Luckily, he himself didn't get hurt. Without hesitation, Zen rolled down along the cliff. As he leapt in the air, he adjusted his body and landed on the ground stably. As soon as his feet hit the ground, he was eager to escape. He remembered that the disciples of Cloud Hall were all watching him covetously, as if he were their prey. The huge array form they had created was a great threat to him. Suddenly Zen froze, sensing something wrong. Uru, he heard the roar of a wolf from above him. He looked up and saw the fierce beast standing on the edge of the stone, howling at the sky. The disciples of Cloud Hall were struck dumb by the wolf's roar, their feet as if turning to ice, unable to move at all. Some of the feeble ones collapsed to the ground, their feet unable to support them. Even Lennon, the top disciple among the lot, looked pale as he stared with unease at the beast on the stone platform. The beast looked like a wolf, but it was much larger than a normal one. Its body was dark as a shadow. Zen didn't know what it was, but Lennon couldn't be more aware of it. It's the Shadow Wolf King. I didn't expect the golden treasure chests on the fourth floor are being guarded by this fierce beast. No wonder no one has taken one box yet. If this beast keeps an eye on the chests, they are designed not to be taken away by anyone at all, Lennon thought, his brows furrowing. The Shadow Wolf King was a legendary fierce beast. It was a kind of shadowy creature that was, in fact, no longer a creature in terms of its nature. After that loud howl, the Shadow Wolf King watched Zen with wild eyes for a moment too long before sauntering back to its cave. The ferocious look almost stalled Zen's heart. Fortunately, he had not ventured to challenge the fourth floor. Zen put a hand on his chest, patting it as he heaved a long sigh. That was when he saw Lennon watching him from the corner of his eyes. To his surprise, however, Lennon did not attack him by using the big array form. The disciple next to Lennon reminded him of it. Lennon, don't you want to kill that boy? Lennon didn't say anything or even move. He merely stared at Zen in silence. Seeing the lost look on Lennon's face, Zen edged away swiftly. He didn't want to stay and waste his time any longer. Zen couldn't figure out why Lennon was behaving like that, but he was lucky that he hadn't been attacked. It was not until Zen was well inside the jungle that Lennon slapped the disciple on his head. Kill him, he snapped. Do you want me dead? The disciple, wincing in pain as he held his head, responded, Lennon, didn't you say you wanted to kill him before? Besides, if we use the 12 earthly branches array, it would kill the boy in an instant. You're an idiot, Lennon said in a huff, throwing him a disdainful look. It was not that Lennon didn't want to kill Zen, but he didn't yet have that courage to do so. After all, as someone born in the clan of the third grade, he was very well aware of his situation. Presently, there were 5 sect leaders and an elder watching from out there. If Lennon had killed Zen before Zen got the silver box, it wouldn't have been a big ordeal. At most, a leader of a second-grade sect would make some trouble for him, but his strong family would well handle it. He was from the South Wangjiao family, after all. Yet, the situation was completely different at present. Zen opened the silver box. Over the years, only head of Cloud Hall had managed to do so. This meant that Zen had the same potential as the head, perhaps even greater potential. Because Zen had opened the silver chest when he was only at the 3rd grade of the nature level, a much lower grade than that of head of Cloud Hall. Back then, when the head of Cloud Hall entered the test of Cloud Road, the warrior had already stepped into the level of the illuminating soul realm. Zen's outstanding performance had certainly grabbed the eyes of the senior leaders of Cloud Hall. Lennon didn't dare to offend Fernandez, one of the elders at Cloud Hall, let alone their more powerful senior leaders. It would be easy to kill Zen using the 12 earthly branches array, but it might be hard to explain to Fernandez why he did it. If Fernandez reported that crime to head of Cloud Hall, Lennon would land himself in big trouble. Perhaps it would even be the biggest trouble he would have to face. Lennon's guess was accurate. Fernandez had previously watched Lennon fight Zen with a big smile. Zen's talent was good, and his performance amazing, but there were too many geniuses from the 5 sects of 2nd grade, not to forget the many geniuses at Cloud Hall. Still, Fernandez had been impressed by Zen's previous performances. That, however, was not enough to warrant Fernandez to protect Zen. But now, things had escalated. After Zen received the silver treasure box of the 3rd floor, Fernandez's opinion of him rose sharply. The moment Zen fell from the 4th floor, Fernandez's heart sunk, his face darkening with worry. He had feared that Lennon would use the 12 earthly branches array to do away with Zen. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to send Lennon a message. Otherwise, he would have warned the top disciple not to act rashly. Even his family power would not be able to back him if he went through with killing Zen. Fortunately, Lennon was a smart boy. He had shrewdly assessed the situation and decided not to aim the array at Zen. Watching Zen leave safe and sound, Fernandez felt his mood brighten up once again. Zen walked along the road that he had earlier taken to the lush jungle. As he made his way, he took out a robe from his space ring. Peeling off the cloth that the wolf had torn apart, he changed into the new robe. Just as he finished, he frowned, sensing that someone was spying on him. "Show yourself," he said out loud. Immediately, a shadow dropped down from the sky, landing onto the ground. It was the cloak boy, Louis. "You are amazing," Louis said earnestly. "You actually got the treasure chest of the 3rd floor. It's unthinkable. Can I come with you? Be your team member?" Zen glanced at the cloak boy dismissively, shaking his head. "I don't work with people who don't show me his real face," he said indifferently, looking away. He soon heard the sound of rustling and looked in the direction of the boy. The cloak boy had taken his cloak off, revealing a handsome face etched with a trace of wickedness. "My name is Louis Bailey," he introduced himself. "I'm Zen Luo," Zen said simply. They continued to walk ahead after the introductions. The test of Cloud Road was only halfway done. Zen couldn't be more aware of the importance of coalition as the test went along. The following ones would be even more difficult. Unfortunately, Roche and Patrick had left earlier. But Louis was strong too, and he would prove to be a good partner to him. Louis, however, was quite verbose. For a while, he kept asking Zen questions, bothering him, which made Zen regret agreeing to the partnership. Zen walked out of the jungle and saw the upsurge of the Sea of Raging Fire. "The Sea of Raging Fire is beginning to recede," he said. "Let's go." Chapter 367, The Choice Between Life and Death. Lava washed over the exposed bare rocks as the Sea of Raging Fire receded. Numerous cultivators not far away flew down from a high platform and landed on the stones. They leapt forward from one rock to another and rushed forth. Behind the other cultivators were Zen and Louis, who both quickened their paces. They were on high alert as they followed the rest of them. As they trailed behind the group, Zen intentionally increased his speed to get rid of Louis. However, he didn't expect the guy to be much faster than him. When Zen sped up, Louis kept up. When Zen slowed down, he also slowed down. Moreover, Louis kept talking to him by his side. "Zen, what on earth is in the silver treasure chest on the 3rd floor?" Louis asked. Zen only rolled his eyes at Louis' question. Was he really that naive to believe that Zen would answer his question? Louis didn't miss the impatience in Zen's eyes. Although he felt embarrassed, he smiled and continued talking. He changed topics instead and said, "The hidden test was so hard." "Do you think so too, Zen?" "Hard?" Zen thought to himself. The answer was yes. Ever since he had stepped on Cloud Road, he didn't find the tests difficult except for the hidden one. Several elite disciples had previously died in the former tests. It was because they were unlucky, or they simply weren't good enough to be called as elites. He did have to admit that the hidden test was ridiculously difficult. When he chanced upon the hidden test, he aimed for the black treasure chest at the top. It turned out that despite his best efforts, he only got the silver treasure chest on the 3rd floor and those below it. The Shadow Wolf King on the 4th floor was more powerful than Zen had imagined. He wouldn't gamble his life with no certainty of success. Thus, he backed off the challenge. It was clear that the hidden test was immensely difficult. The elite disciples of every sect found it extremely hard to even get the red treasure chest on the 1st floor. The disciples of Cloud Hall who were eligible to enter the Cloud Road were equal to the top disciples of a 2nd-grade sect. However, they too had failed to obtain the chest on the 1st floor. The level of difficulty on each floor determined the preciousness of the treasure in the chest. Maybe it was even impossible to find such treasures in the Cloud Hall. If it were the Cloud Hall who had arranged all the tests, would they really put Malicious Wheel of Life and Death, a Tier 5 cultivation method, as a reward in the chest? It was highly impossible. Such a top-level method was unlikely to be accessible even for Kenneth, and more so as a reward in the Cloud Road for the disciples. Thus, how could it have appeared there? Perhaps the answer was hidden in the Blood Fiend Emperor. A strong man had once lived in this place and was called Emperor. It was safe to say that the ancient ruins were a region of a 6th-grade sect. For some reason, however, the sect fell apart and the Blood Fiend Emperor got injured, so he had to leave. Before he left, he hid all the treasures in the Cloud Road. That made the tests more difficult. It was the most plausible reason why the hidden test was so excruciating but yielded amazing rewards. Therefore, the treasures in the golden and black treasure chests must be the most coveted heirlooms of the 6th-grade sect. However, they were all guesses, but Zen was determined to get those 2 treasure chests, whether his speculations were right or wrong. As for how to obtain the chests, it took time to plan it out. "Hey, what are you thinking about? You haven't answered me yet," Lewis said when he saw Zen had spaced out. Zen curled his lips. He didn't really want to talk to Lewis, so he sped up, but the guy was like a sticky candy that he couldn't get rid of. Just then, a column of molten lava that was about 100 feet high, suddenly emerged from the sea of raging fire in front of them. The molten lava shot up high in the sky, then rained down. A lot of hot liquid splattered down to where the disciples stood. "Careful," someone cried out. The cultivators heard the warning, so some of them exerted their life vitality to protect themselves. Others used the protection treasures as a shield against the raining lava. Zen also emitted a sword in tent, which wrapped around him and whisked away the molten lava. Meanwhile, Lewis used his black cloak. It looked ordinary, but it was a magic treasure. Not only did it conceal his breath, it also formed a special force field which enabled the molten lava to slip down the cloak when it splashed on his body. The rain soon cooled to a damp mist and the column of lava disappeared. However, it was just the calm before the storm. A huge monster suddenly rose from the sea of raging fire. It was 1,000 feet high with a body as big as a mountain. "Fire whale! It's a fire whale!" one disciple exclaimed in panic. "Keep calm. The fire whale has a very docile temperament and it seldom attacks humans. We can guarantee our own safety as long as we do not enrage it." Zen looked at the huge fire whale in deep shock. He didn't expect for such a monster to have appeared in the sea of raging fire. The giant whale poked its head above the lava and lazily swam around. It looked similar to the ordinary whales because they all had blue backs and white abdomens. Their only difference was the fire whale had red stripes on its back. No one could allow themselves to disturb such a monster. It could splash the lava around to at least 100 feet high with its tail if it got angry, and they would all be killed in an instant. Zen had previously planned to swim across the rest of the sea of raging fire, but now it seemed impossible. Although his invulnerable body could withstand the burning lava, he couldn't imagine how many other terrible creatures were in the sea. He wasn't sure if he could fight against all of them. Everyone moved so cautiously so as not to disturb the fire whale. They all moved slowly and held their breaths. Fortunately, the fire whale seemed to have no interest in these tiny humans. It surfaced for a breath of air, then slowly dived down and disappeared. The cultivators heaved a long sigh of relief when the whale swam away. They picked up their speed and continued to swiftly run forward. Another wave seemed to approach them as they progressed. Luckily, the cultivators had already jumped on a high platform before it arrived, and successfully avoided the surging tide. Zen thought there would be no one on the platform, because the third platform was the same as the first platform and they were just temporary resting places. The disciples should have left when the tide had gone out. After all, the end of the sea of raging fire was just up ahead and no one would waste time staying on the platform. However, to Zen's surprise, the third high platform was full of people. It seemed that all the disciples of the 5 second-grade sects in Cloud Hall had gathered in the small platform. Rocher, Zen called out. He immediately spotted him among the group. When Rocher heard his name being called out, he whipped his head around and saw Zen. "We are trapped here," he said bitterly with a wry smile. "Trapped here? Can't we get through?" Zen asked. Rocher just shook his head. "I'm afraid we can't. The rocks ahead of us have been badly destroyed," he answered. Zen's forehead creased when he heard this. How could the rocks be destroyed? He was surprised. He never imagined that such an emergency could happen. Although several rocks were damaged on their way behind, they left a short gap just enough for them to jump across. This time, however, more than 100 rocks in front of them were destroyed. None of them could jump quite far, and flying was forbidden on the Cloud Road. Therefore, all the warriors were trapped. In such a case, people found it both funny and annoying that they didn't know what they should do. They had a hard time getting here. Did they have to go back to the way they came from? Thus, most of the cultivators decided to return to the high platform to make a countermeasure first. Zen looked around and didn't see Patrick. "Why isn't Patrick here?" he asked. The platform wasn't that big, so he should have easily found Patrick if he was there. Zen was confused. Patrick had gone ahead of him, but he never met him along the way and he wasn't on the platform as well. Where did he go? Was he dead already? Zen thought that it was unlikely for Patrick to die on the Cloud Road due to his strength. "He has chosen another way," Rocher said with a smile. "Another road?" Zen asked. "I have never heard that there was another road," he added. He was even more surprised. "Yes, there is. Frank, Lois, Patrick and the other 2 disciples have all chosen that way. There are only a few damaged rocks on that road and it isn't that hard to cross," Rocher explained. "So, why didn't you take that way?" Zen asked. "Because that road is called Death Road," a disciple of Cloud Hall coldly interrupted. Rocher nodded in agreement. "According to the disciples of Cloud Hall, there is a fork in the road ahead. It diverges into 2 roads. One is called Life Road, the other is called Death Road," he added. The Cloud Road was certainly full of mysteries. Almost all the disciples had chosen the Life Road when they were in the fork. Although there were once disciples who had chosen the Death Road, they didn't survive in the end. As time passed, the people had gradually forgotten about the Death Road and believed that the Life Road was the only way. The so-called Death Road was actually not a road, but just a trap. For them, it was a way that led to death and no one could ever get through it. Chapter 368, A Dead End. Gazing at the sea of raging fire, Zen got lost in thought again. His heart sank, as he realized that the difficulty level of the Cloud Road test was higher than he had expected. Now he understood why the previous hidden test had been so difficult. The Death Road was a concealing test, too. Compared to Life Road, it was tougher. Since the difficulty level of the test was much higher, the Death Road seemed to have become a dead end. Few passed the test. This led to this test bearing the name Death Road Test. Since the test was so difficult, besides competence and power, luck was also a vital virtue. Zen figured out that the secret of the Cloud Road might lie in the Death Road. "Let's take the Death Road too," he said to Rocher. The platform was not huge and most of the practitioners were on it, waiting to try their luck. When they heard Zen was about to pick the Death Road, a distrustful expression appeared on their faces. "Are you joking? Frank and Lois are powerful, so they have a slim chance of passing the Death Road. However, as a practitioner at the 3rd grade of the nature level, how dare you take the same road?" Everyone was of the same opinion, but none of them reminded or warned Zen and they just let him have his way. Zen had nothing to do with them, so they didn't care about whether he would be alive or dead at all. Although more than 100 stones had broken on the Life Road, the practitioners could find a way by pooling the wisdom and efforts of everyone together. For example, earlier, the female disciple of iridescent sect formed a provisional road for the practitioners by condensing the lava with her own cultivation method. This induced a cooling effect and that would bring help. If the practitioners who possessed such skills could cooperate well, they would be able to jump onto the Life Road. The practitioners were discussing how to cooperate by using resources they had and how to control the timing, so that they could reach the destination earlier and with no strain. Rocher pondered for a short moment. However, before he could answer, Louis, who had been consulting in the crowd and getting ideas, moved closer to Zen. He shouted, "Excellent idea. I'll pick the death road too." Zen rolled his eyes in disbelief. He knew it was difficult to get rid of Louis. Since he offered to join him, Zen had no option but to agree. "Then, count me in," Rocher said. He had been hesitant when Patrick asked him to go with him. Maybe in his eyes, he had a better chance to pass the test by cooperating with Zen. When the tide of the Sea of Raging Fire fell, the other practitioners were still planning on passing the life road. On the other hand, Zen, Rocher and Louis had jumped off the platform. A practitioner snorted, "Why, there are so many daredevils. 3 more people are asking for death." "What do you mean by more? Are you saying that Frank is asking for death by taking the death road?" The disciples of the Cloud Hall were fuming with anger. In the back of their minds, nobody could be on par with Frank, and Frank could go everywhere he pleased. All the disciples of Cloud Hall had cheered up when Frank took the death road after the tide had ebbed last time. In their mind, the death road was not that horrible, and those who had perished on the death road were practitioners without enough proficiency. However, Frank differed from those practitioners. They believed that he had no problem passing the death road. It made them so mad and fume with anger when they heard someone hinting that he might be dead by taking the death road. Seeing how angry they were, the rest of the practitioners went mute. However, they were not of the same opinion as these disciples of Cloud Hall. Since the other practitioners had dared to try the death road, they shouldn't be much inferior to Frank. Life was so precious for everyone, so without confidence, this would be the last road they would have taken. As the disciples of Cloud Hall were aggressive, none of the other practitioners dared offend them, and no one uttered a sound to them. All they did was to speak silently. Taking the opportunity that the tide was ebbing, Zen, Rocher, and Louis rushed forward along the stones. Soon, they came to an intersection. The intersection extended to 2 roads. However, both of them seemed to be broken off by some powerful wild beast. There were more than 100 broken stones on the road on the right. This could mean only one thing, that it was the life road. Normally, the practitioners would choose the life road to pass the lava sea. Different from the road on the right, only several stones were broken on the road on the left. It was the death road. "Let's jump over." Since he had picked the death road, Zen rushed downwards and then jumped over without hesitation. In a blink of an eye, he reached the opposite side. Rocher was a determined and ambitious person too. He had thought it over before joining Zen, so he wouldn't change his mind. Then he took a sigh of breath and jumped over as Zen had done. Now it was Louis' turn. Yippee! Louis jumped in the air like a hawk and even shook his cloak into the shape of 2 wings. Then he stepped on the air to rebound himself higher, screaming. Rocher looked at him and couldn't help showering him with praises. "Excellent job." Zen rolled his eyes and snorted, "Another idiot." Louis' style was like Evan's, but he was a little more normal than Evan, who was always so hyper. Otherwise, Zen would have tried all his efforts to get rid of him. "Now we're heading for the death road. Let's go." The 3 moved forward on the stones in a row. After they had run for a while, the lava of the Sea of Raging Fire began to wave again. "The tide is rising. Why haven't we reached the end of the road yet?" Zen said, in disbelief. Louis looked very disappointed. "Now I know why it's named Death Road. That means it is a road without end. If that's the case, we will immerse in lava." "Cheer up, come on," Zen said with encouragement. The Cloud Road had been originally set for testing the disciples of a grade 6 sect. Zen didn't believe that the Death Road was a death end. He was sure that Blood Fiend Emperor wouldn't have created such a road to cheat the disciples, as it was meaningless. "Zen, look over there." Rocher, who had been dumb all this while, pointed ahead. The stones extended to afar and then disappeared somewhere. It was a dead end. Louis shook his head with a sad look and said, "I'm right." "You are such a jinx." Zen hurled insults at him. His heart sank when he saw it was a dead end. However, he kept going, and his fight spirit grew. This was all he needed right now. Now the tide of the Sea of Raging Fire began to rise, so it was too late to retreat. What Zen could do was to try his luck. He still didn't believe that the designer of the Cloud Road had made a road to trap the practitioners. "What shall we do? I don't want to die," Louis cried out while he was running. "Oh, no, I have a promising future and I don't want to drown in the Sea of Raging Fire. Mom, please forgive me. My wish of always taking care of you has been cut short. I can't take good care of you any longer." When Louis was screaming his lungs out, Rocher had already jumped onto another stone. He turned around, grabbed Louis by the collar and then pulled out a sword from his back before placing it against Louis' neck. "Stop screaming, or this will be the end of you." Rocher wasn't a blabbermouth like Louis, and he wasn't that patient like Zen. So, when he faced the death road and the rising lava, he felt a great deal of pressure. Besides being very verbose, Louis had also been used to calming his nerves by screaming when he was under ordeals. Just like someone would pull his hair or keep on eating when they felt nervous. While releasing his own stress, Louis conveyed his pressure to Rocher and Zen. "No, don't kill me. I promise to keep my mouth shut. Is that okay with you?" Louis pleaded. In fact, if not because he hadn't been defenseless, with Louis' current competence, Rocher wouldn't have caught him so easily. Rocher wouldn't end his life. He grunted and threw him onto the stone before proceeding. Zen looked at Louis with a slight smirk on his face and shook his head. He then followed Rocher forward. Louis still drew a long face but kept his silence. He had to be still. As they were approaching the end of the death road, the lava tide was closer to them. It distressed them and their hearts pounded. If the lava tide rose to a certain level, that would be their end. They held their breath as they waited for the turn of events. Chapter 369, Twists and Turns. 400 feet, 300 feet, 200 feet. Their eyes gazed at the stones that loomed before them as they drew nearer to a dead end. Could they still survive in such a desperate situation? The atmosphere grew more tense as their uncertainty increased. If it was a common dead end, they had no choice but to die. Colors. They have different colors, Zen suddenly shouted. He was the first one who noticed the difference in color. He found that there were rows of runes on the stone pillars' surfaces at the dead end. "March," Rocher said and rushed forward. His eyes glinted as he charged with gritted teeth. Although he didn't know what the runes meant, he saw a silver lining. Besides, they had no way back. The lava tide surged again. The stone pillars would be soon submerged in it, since only the tops of the pillars were visible now. There were 10 stone pillars in the dead end, and every pillar was circled by runes. When Zen stepped on them, the runes lit up. He swiftly moved past 10 pillars, and each one of them lit up. Finally, Zen came to the end. Suddenly, a vortex appeared. The dark bluish-gray vortex was similar to the vortex that they had encountered under the arched gateway of the Cloud Road. "A road," Zen exclaimed. His eyes brightened and a smile found its way to his face. It turned out that he was right in the gamble. At the same time, Rocher had followed and caught up to him. When he reached the last pillar and stepped on it, a vortex appeared in front of him as well. Did that mean everyone had a vortex? At that moment, another person rushed to the scene. Louis looked like he fell into the waters but was able to grasp at a life-saving straw. When he saw the vortex, he raced so fast that he was even quicker than Zen and Rocher had been. He even jumped into the air with his unique bodily movement skills which he took much pride in, and landed steadily on the last pillar. But he didn't see a third vortex appear in front of him. What happened? He wondered. Louis blanched. The lava tide surged higher and had already reached the pillar's surface. Why wasn't there a vortex for him? Dang it, I don't care. I'll just jump in any of the vortexes. As soon as he finished his words, he jumped into one of the vortexes. However, when he got in halfway, a huge repelling force pushed him back. "This is not the vortex you have triggered. You can't go in. Did you miss any pillar just now?" Zen asked in a heavy tone. Meanwhile, the lava rose higher and higher. It seems like so. Louis' nerves were on edge. He got too excited when he saw the vortexes that he jumped over the 4th pillar and missed it. "Go back to step on it," Zen said. But, the 4th pillar was almost submerged by the lava tide already. The runes flickered in the view as the orange glow of the lahar rose continuously. "Okay, but we don't care if you die or not," Rocher said coldly, and then he turned to Zen. "It's time we went inside." "Let's go, Zen." After Rocher spoke, Louis flew into the air with gritted teeth. He hovered above for a while, then landed effortlessly on the 4th pillar. It wasn't a surprise for him to make it as he was skilled at bodily movement himself. He was like a giant bird that soared in the air as he lit the runes on the pillar with his tiptoe, then he swiftly came back. All the pillars were now submerged by the lava. Zen and Rocher already jumped into the vortexes. Unfortunately, Louis had nowhere to stand on now. All step, step, step. Luckily, Louis had mastered extraordinary bodily movement skill. If it were Zen or Rocher who was in the same situation, they probably would not succeed. Louis could gain momentum and fly into the air. He was able to maintain the height he reached in the air with the help of his cloak. He looked like a hen that struggled to flap its wings when he performed his special method. Unfortunately, he fell down despite his great efforts to maintain balance. In the end, Louis fell into the vortex and left a downward parabola-like trace in the air. After he fell into the vortex, he fell heavily on the ground with a resounding thud. He clutched his right foot in his hands and groaned in pain. Apparently, his foot was hurt. The lava already covered the pillars when he fled the place, and the molten liquid was extremely hot. Even Louis only touched the pillar with his tiptoe, some lava was splashed on his foot. Not everyone had an indestructible body like Zen. It was extremely painful to be burned by the lava. Suddenly, there was a clattering sound. Rocher threw Louis a small bottle. "Take it. It is ice pill for treating wounds from empirosis." Louis looked at him gratefully. He took the pill and put it into his mouth. As Louis swallowed the pill, Zen and Rocher looked around to check the surroundings. The road they had chosen was the death road, but the test they had gone through just now wasn't as difficult as they had imagined. They could easily conquer it as long as they were firm enough. Since they picked the death road, then the real test lay ahead. They seemed to have entered a separate space after they went through the vortexes. The space was dim and the sky was gray, with only a few flashes of light in it. The surroundings had a depressing effect. It was like a cramped place where daylight would never come. There was a jungle in the distance. The darkness in the jungle was even more frightening, as no one knew what mysterious and powerful beings would lurk in there. "Let's go," Zen announced. Rocher followed him closely. Louis hurriedly stood up and hobbled along behind. Although cultivators usually recovered rapidly and Louis took an ice pill from Rocher, it still took some time for the wound to heal completely. Now, Louis regretted that he hadn't obtained the blue treasure box. If he had gone all out to take it and had sucked the nine-headed dragon's blood vigor, his small wound would have healed immediately. They had reached the dark jungle, but they barely saw anything except the tiny glimmers of light. They only moved forward by instinct. Louis had shut up this time. It was a critical moment and he wasn't dumb, otherwise he wouldn't have had such a high strength level. He would be headed towards an early grave if he dared to rant or even speak in such place. They had only walked in the dark and quiet jungle for a short while before they suddenly heard something swish in the air and shoot towards them. Whoosh! The sound was faint but Zen had heard it. "Be careful," Louis reminded. Fortunately, Zen had reacted quickly. He reached out his hand and pulled Rocher back. Then, they saw a small, dark narrow shadow brush past them. However, it grazed past Rocher and hurt his arm. The fabric that covered Rocher's arm was cut open and revealed a small scratch on the skin. "What's that?" Rocher held his blood-corroding sword in his hand and cautiously looked around. The small black shadow didn't seem to be a hidden weapon like a dart, since they all saw it swerve its direction after it hit Rocher, and disappeared into the jungle again. It was more like some kind of creature. Meanwhile, Louis sniffed the air and his eyes widened. "I saw it. It is a kind of a tiny bat. It has very thin, sharp wings like a blade. This kind of blade bat has hurt Rocher," he suddenly blurted out. "How did you see that?" Zen asked curiously. A giggle escaped Louis' lips. "I have a special talent to see things in the dark. As long as there is a glimmer of light, I can see everything clearly without difficulty. Even if it's so dim here, I can still see clearly as if we were in broad daylight," he said. It turned out that he had an inborn night vision. It wasn't until then that Zen noticed that Louis' eyes had a blue flash of light. His eyes were similar to those of cats, which could see things in low light conditions. "Be careful, dudes. There are a lot of them around." As soon as Louis' words sank in, they heard a wave of rustling sounds. It looked like the bats came in groups as the swishing sounds engulfed the air. A large number of black shadows rushed towards them in the dark. They had extremely sharp wings, which left long and narrow cuts on anything they hit. At that moment, Sword Intent appeared and circled around Zen and Rocher to protect them. It formed a cyclone which firmly wrapped them up within its shield of protection. Any blade that came to attack them would be instantly smashed into pieces by the consummate Sword Intent. Although the blade bats had sharp wings and were numerous in number, they were actually quite weak individually. Zen's and Rocher's shields of Sword Intent were the bane of the bats and it killed all of them that tried to attack. However, Louis didn't have the tough Sword Intent that Zen and Rocher possessed. He had no choice but to wrap his body within his cloak. That way, he completely hid his scent. Those bats didn't have eyes. They sensed the existence of humans in a very special way. Lewis' magical cloak prevented his scent from being detected. Even though the three men all had their own ways to protect themselves, they were still on high alert. The Death Road was not an empty name. It wasn't that easy for them to get through. They headed forward and there appeared a vortex not far away. Still leading us to another place. Zen's face darkened. Where will we be led to? Rocher had a hunch that it was not a good sign. They were headed deeper to a dead end that would eventually lead them to death. What humans feared the most was not a monster or a ghost, but uncertainty. If they discovered a ghost, they wouldn't be so scared as they saw what it looked like. Before they embarked on the Cloud Road, they were aware that there would be a path that led them to the finish line. Although they knew they would face many difficulties along the way, at least they knew where the road headed to. But now, the road they trod on was the Death Road. They had no idea where it would bring them to. Then again, there were no other better choices. They went through the vortex. An explosive sound was heard when they landed, followed by blazing flames that rose up in the air. It is the Karma Fire. Zen screamed. He had recognized it at first sight. The flames were the Green Lotus Karma Fire from Patrick. But, who was he fighting against? This trick was Patrick's trump card that he usually didn't utilize until someone forced him to do so. When Patrick had initiated his Akalanatha Shadow, this technique was only usable again after several days. Moreover, he usually didn't employ it unless he was in great danger. It was clear that Patrick was in a tough situation. Who was Patrick fighting against? Zen asked as he looked at the direction where the flames came from. I don't know. Let's go check. Zen strode forward and moved quickly to where the flames were from. They were rivals in Cloud Sect back then, but they were all now in Cloud Road. They were in the same team now since they all came from Cloud Sect. Thus, Zen naturally thought that he must help Patrick at this critical moment. Chapter 370, The Flying Yaksha. Flames from suddenly blazed up, lightening almost half of the night sky. Zen and the other two ran to the Karma Fire, breaking down branches and twigs on the way as they moved along. Even the trunks of thousand-year trees were instantly chopped into pieces by the consummate sword intent. As Lewis saw Zen advancing like that, the corners of his mouth twitched. That two are just unbelievable. They both have the consummate sword intent. Are they really from a second-rate sect? Although Lewis was a babbling kind of guy, he was quite confident about his strength. Although he was able to come all the way there, he still had a feeling of having no advantage over Zen and Rocher. Despite that, Lewis had something he was always proud of. If I let my power out all at a time, I may have a chance against them, he thought to himself. As Zen and the other two got out of the woods, they were astonished at the scene that had unveiled in front of their eyes. There was a crater with a radius of 1,000 feet and was stretching outside the woods. It looked like it was caused by a fierce battle. At the middle of the crater, a blazing bright green lotus Karma Fire enveloped Patrick. He was fighting against a beast. The beast had two wings on its back, a horn protruding from its forehead and a face of a bear. It was standing on its two hind legs, basking in a pool of silver light. Patrick's Karma Fire was well known in the Cloud Sect. Last time, Zen successfully threw off Patrick's Karma Fire only because of his special spiritual weapon-like body. Plus, at that time, he didn't take the Green Lotus Karma Fire head-on but was simply immune to its power. However, the beast had successfully resisted the scorching Karma Fire that Patrick cast and it was even battling Patrick in the same fire. Boom, 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 that beast stumped forward, raised its beefy arms, and wrestled Patrick, who already was in the diamond-like state. With merely 3 blows, Patrick was sent flying out of his Karma Fire and fell heavily onto the ground. The impact caused a deep dent on the earth. That power is quite terrifying. Seeing that, Zen's pupils had narrowed. That power is probably much more formidable than when I activate all of my dragon scales. He thought. After repelling Patrick, the beast spread its wings and made another charge at him. Obviously, this time it intended to kill Patrick. Precisely at that moment, a white figure dashed from the verge of the huge crater. It was a disciple of the Cloud Hall. Clutching a 13-inch long spear, that disciple flickered his wrist. Instantly, the spear weaved its way towards the beast as if it were a poisonous snake. Fogbow streaking across the sky. A jet of sharp spear intent shot out from the white spear as if it could pierce through anything in the world. Zen was stunned at the sight of the spear and its power. Whoa, that man is really powerful. It was the first time that Zen saw someone that powerful from Cloud Hall since he started the test. When he was taking the hidden test in the valley, he did come across a powerful opponent. That disciple was Lenin, the disciple in charge of that large magic array. Zen didn't know Lenin before, but still, he sensed his intimidating power. But based on Zen's observation, Lenin was on the same level as Lewis in terms of strength. Perhaps only a mite stronger. Thus, Lenin's power was not a threat to Zen at all. But the man fighting in the crater was different. His attack using the spear already posed a huge threat on Zen. If it were Zen who was targeted by the spear, even with his body like a high-grade spiritual weapon, he would probably be torn apart like a sheet of paper. Judging by that one strike, Zen knew that the man's power was way stronger than any of the usual Cloud Hall disciples. That spear intent must be a consummate one, Roche commented. Cutters had cutter intent, the swords had sword intent, while the spears had spear intent as well. The intent attached to such weapons would improve along with the development of the relationship between the practitioner and the weapon itself. As the practitioner familiarized himself with his weapon, the weapon would also get to know its owner. Gradually, the practitioner would have a perfect command of his weapon. He is Frank Joe from the Cloud Hall. It's normal for him to display that strength, Lewis noted, curling his lips. Frank Joe, Zen murmured. He had always believed that on the road of pursuing the martial arts, one just had to keep going. If there was a chance to outstrip an opponent, then, he ought to do it. If the opponent was out of his league, he should work harder to catch up with him and be on his team. In fact, Roche did the same thing. When he found he could not surpass Zen, he chose to follow Zen's paces and try to keep up with him. If Zen scored something, he would certainly gain some achievement as well. For Roche, it was a helpless choice, but it was indeed the smart one. Given that some people were simply born with special talents or strong physique, no one could deny the fact that there was always someone more able, perfect, and powerful in the world. Thus, whether Zen would finally outpace or follow behind Frank, one thing was for sure: he just needed to challenge Frank. However, now wasn't the right time. With so many unknown creatures attacking them as they proceeded down the death road, Zen was left with no choice but to help those in the same boat as him. Swoosh! The beast that had warded off the green lotus karma fire was hit by the spear. That white spear penetrated through the beast's arm. A ferocious look surfaced from its face and suddenly let out a deafening howl, making everyone's ears tingle. The beast then pounced on Frank. It was 3 meters high, large, and bulky but quite agile. Flapping its wings, it swooped down upon Frank repeatedly. Despite being under attack by the fierce beast, Frank was still very calm. He continuously hit with his spear every time the beast struck at him. Sky-breaking thrust, recurring thrust, circling thrust. Each time the spear lunged forward, it hit one of the beast's palms. After several thrusts, the palms of that violent beast were bleeding profusely. "Frank, go get it!" shouted a woman who was standing on the side together with a group of people. Since Zen and the other two hadn't met any female disciple in the Cloud Hall before, they assumed she was from the iridescent sect. "She is Lois Jin from the iridescent sect. I heard that she is engaged to Frank, so she must be Frank's fiancé," Lewis came out to explain. Smart guy. Shaking his head, Zen gave a smile. This Lewis does like gabbling and self-talking. Still, he is quite well informed, he thought to himself. Being tall, slender, and otherworldly good-looking, Lois looked like a perfect match for Frank. The two seemed destined to be with each other. "Let's go to them. Seems that Frank's got enough strength to tackle that beast," Zen suggested. Then, the three walked towards the group. At that point, Lois and her league happened to notice Zen and his companions. They all looked astounded, apparently taken aback by the fact that there were more people who dared to enter the death road other than themselves. After observing the fight between Frank and the beast even for a while, Zen thought that Frank had it all under control, so they simply decided to hit the road. However, something unexpected happened before they could go around the beast. As the fight continued, the beast suddenly let out a bellow before clapping its wings to draw a few steps back. The silver light around it slowly dimmed, but the next second, layers of golden scales started covering its body. "Be careful, this flying yaksha is going through a transfiguration. It'll become much stronger," a Cloud Hall disciple behind Lois cried. Lois looked over her shoulder, casting a startled glance at the Cloud Hall disciple. Even Frank was bewildered as he heard that remark. Since Zen and his companions just arrived here, they had no idea what was going on. They reckoned that the Cloud Hall disciple was a knowledgeable guy. Frank, however, was totally mystified by this fact. Frank had entered the death road along with 4 other people, Lois, Patrick, Brahma sect Sade, and a Cloud Hall disciple. Many Cloud Hall disciples had managed to get onto the Cloud Road. They had even outnumbered the disciples of any other sects. Nevertheless, with his remarkable memory, Frank could call everyone by their names. But he found himself unable to recognize the Cloud Hall disciple. It was absurd because that Cloud Hall disciple was not supposed to exist. However, he did encounter him on the Cloud Road. Frank also noticed that the Cloud Hall disciple was quite familiar with this death road. When everybody started considering giving it up because the death road of the Sea of Raging Fire was a dead end, it was the Cloud Hall disciple who urged them to hold on and assured them that the exit was right at the end of the road. Surely, as he said, plenty of whirls appeared just as they reached the last stone on that dead-end road. After jumping into the whirls, the Cloud Hall disciple appeared to know the death road ahead of them as his own palms. He helped them avoid loads of dangerous spots before they barged into the nest of this flying yaksha by accident. And that was how they got the flying yaksha chasing them all the way here. None of them knew that the beast was called flying yaksha until the Cloud Hall disciple cried it out loud. Naturally, they started to have some doubts. Who is this Cloud Hall disciple? Why did he take the death road with us? What's his game? Frank was baffled by those questions. Of course, Zen had no idea about those scruples Frank and Lois had. But as he saw the flying yaksha beginning its transfiguration, his face grew serious as well. This flying yaksha was already pretty strong in its normal shape. If it completes the transfiguration and becomes more powerful, I bet no one can subdue it. Rocher, let's go to fight it together. Zen called out as he fished out the blood-drinking sword. Rocher also drew out the blood-corroding sword over his shoulder. He gazed at the golden flying yaksha in the air, his eyes as sharp as blades. I don't need your help. If you strike, you'll just get in my way, Frank said as he brandished the spear in his hand. Apparently, the arrival of Zen and his companions would not be of any help for Frank. He believed they would be a drag on his team. After all, the three were fairly low-ranked. One was merely at the 3rd grade of the nature level, one had just consummated the natural level, and the other one was at the 1st grade of the illuminating soul realm. They should have known better than to step onto the death road. Now that they did, they were just extra burdens for Frank. From his perspective, Lois and Patrick were the only two eligible to fight by his side. As to Zaid Joe from the Brahma sect, he would have died 1,000 times if not for Frank's protection. Frank was very confident about his strength, though he was rather arrogant. Since he had absolute power, he didn't mind taking care of a few more people. But if others wanted to butt in on his fight, they should first ask themselves if they had the same strength as him. And it was evident that Zen did not have that kind of strength. Therefore, Frank chose to confront the transfigured flying yaksha on his own. Chapter 371. The picture on the picture slab disappeared. Zen smiled slightly and remained silent when he heard Frank. In comparison to Zen's indifference, Rocher looked rather angry and said, "Gosh. This guy is too cocky. If Frank says you're in his way, then you are in his way. If you want to survive on death road, you'd better do as told." Lois, Frank's fiancée, warned Rocher when she heard what he said. Rocher pouted and wanted to retort, but Zen stopped him. He then heard Zen say, "Forget it, Rocher. Since Frank is so confident of his strength, we're happy to watch him defeat the flying yaksha alone." Both Zen and Rocher were at the nature level, and before showing their real strength, they did look like weaker than of any average disciple from the Cloud Hall. However, sometimes, being underestimated by others was not a bad thing, especially on the death road, a dangerous area. Since Frank was willing to be the hero and block the attacks of the golden flying yaksha himself, it would be advantageous for Zen and Rocher as they wouldn't have to fight. They could simply watch him. Louis, who was standing next to Zen, did not speak. Although he had outstanding strength, Louis was not very bold. Otherwise, he would not have given up the treasure box in the 2nd tier so easily. "Oh, right, we need to check if Patrick is all right first. He has been attacked by the flying yaksha thrice. I'm worried he might have been hurt," said Zen. Concerned, he hurriedly walked to the edge of the big pit in search of Patrick. By the time they reached the edge, Patrick had climbed up. The golden light protecting him was slowly fading away. Although he did not appear to have been badly hurt, he looked a mess and was covered with dirt. Meanwhile, his breath seemed a little weaker. "Patrick, are you all right?" Zen asked, genuinely worried. "Zen, Rocher, you guys are here, too." At the sight of his two companions, Patrick exclaimed excitedly. Joy reflected in his expression. Unlike Frank, Patrick knew clearly about the strength of Zen and Rocher. Zen was much stronger than him, a fact that had been confirmed during the All Peaks competition, while during his battle with Rocher, Patrick found that Rocher was only a little weaker than him. The death road was full of deadly traps, and if Zen and Rocher were to join him, it would definitely be advantageous to him. Patrick's injury was not serious. Yet, the problem was that to fight against the flying yaksha, he had used the power of the Akalanatha. As a result, for the next few days, he could not be able to use it. Since he had temporarily lost this ability, Patrick's combat effectiveness was significantly weakened. As they spoke, Frank engaged in a fierce fight with the golden flying yaksha. Of course, the flying yaksha was extremely strong, and the corporeal body of this kind of fierce beast was quite appalling. However, Frank's spear was also extremely sharp. The so-called horizontal saber, vertical sword, piercing spear, referred to the following three arguments. The saber was usually used to chop, and the momentum of a saber could be powerful. The sword had the ability to cut and pierce, while the spear's attack mode was relatively single, focusing on piercing only. As the spear was used to penetrate only, its piercing function was the strongest among the three kinds of weapons. Together, with Frank's spear intent of consummate grade, the spear attacks launched by Frank could perforate any object within his attacking space. But, after the flying yaksha transformed, a layer of extremely hard gold scales appeared around its body as a defense against any attack. Earlier, Frank had been able to break through the flying yaksha's defenses, but now when Frank's white spear collided with the gold scales of the flying yaksha, it was blocked. The attacks were only able to leave several tiny marks on its surface. Howl, the flying yaksha emitted a roar. This time, it relied on its strong corporeal body, so it pounced on Frank recklessly. Frank, on the other hand, continued to retreat from its violent attacks with his dexterous body-moving skills. "We are really going to watch him and not offer any help?" Rocher asked anxiously. When he saw that Frank was retreating continuously and seemed to be in great danger, a hint of worry appeared on his face. Although Frank was annoying, he was really powerful. If they wanted to get out of the death road successfully, they knew that they must unite. Thus, Rocher found it hard to stand still and watch the flying yaksha kill Frank. Zen, however, shook his head and said calmly, "His fiancée, Lois, isn't offering him any help, which indicates that Frank has reserved his strength. Otherwise, Lois would be more worried than us." Rocher then saw that Lois was standing calmly not far from them. Her arms were wrapping around her chest as she watched Frank. The expression on her face reflected that she had great confidence in him. Zen's speculation was correct. Lois did believe that Frank could beat the flying yaksha and trusted her fiancé's strength absolutely. Frank was a little embarrassed after being pushed back over 100 feet by the flying yaksha. But, a calm expression remained on his handsome face. If one looked carefully, they would see a small smile on Frank's lips. If he kept retreating, Frank would be driven into a dead-end corner with a boulder about 20 feet high. Then, the onlookers noticed Frank sneering before stepping closer to the boulder and kicking it. The force with which Frank kicked the boulder was so tremendous that it left a deep pit in the boulder. With the force of the kick, somehow, Frank's body maintained a straight line with his spear and began to spin fast. As Frank's body spun, a whirling vortex formed at the tip of his white spear. It continuously absorbed the spear intent and created a highly condensed strong energy. As the strong energy was not condensed with life vitality, but with the spear intent of consummate grade, the power it contained was beyond imaginable. "I didn't know that the spear intent could be used in this way," Zen said in surprise. He then exchanged a glance with Rocher. The expression on their faces showed that they had been enlightened. Although Zen and Rocher had figured out the sword intent of the consummate grade, they had not tried to condense sword intent to that extreme extent. This was for several reasons, including the fact that their knowledge about sword intent was limited. Also, during the recent many years, they were the only two people who had figured out the sword intent of the consummate grade in Cloud Sect, and thus, nobody at Cloud Sect could offer them any useful suggestions. Frank's situation was, however, different from theirs. As a disciple of the Cloud Hall in the Central Region, he would have many opportunities to meet well-known masters. Any of them could offer him useful suggestions. Together, with his diligent practice, once he had figured out spear intent of the consummate grade, he would learn how to condense the spear intent easily. Therefore, disciples of Cloud Hall were at an advantage in this respect. Super spinning spear, Frank bellowed as he summoned one of his powerful skills. As he spun at an extreme speed toward the flying yaksha, Frank was integrated with his long white spear. It looked like he had become a part of it. The flying yaksha also felt the power of Frank's attack. But, as the attack had been launched so suddenly, it didn't have any time to respond. It could only cross its arms in front of its chest to resist the attack with the hopes of withstanding the attack with the strength of its corporeal body. Snap, 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 the sound of something breaking filled the silence. The hard gold scales around the arms of the flying yaksha shattered. Frank's spear, infused with his spear intent of the consummate grade, finally managed to pierce through the flying yaksha. Taking advantage, Frank pushed the spear deep inside it. After the white spear penetrated the flying yaksha's arms, its momentum remained unabated. It then pierced through the flying yaksha's chest. It was indeed surprising to see the flying yaksha be defeated in such a manner. It looked as though the flying yaksha were a skewered shrimp waiting to be grilled. Ah, 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 the flying yaksha roared as pain coursed through its corporeal body. It had extremely strong vitality. Even though the spear had penetrated its viscera, it was still alive. Yet, since the spear had impaled its arms, it could not launch an attack. Just as it tried to pull its body out of the white spear with its feet, Frank raised the spear high in the air. Then he thrust the white spear rod into the ground. The flying yaksha that was still attached to the spear's tip now looked like a flag. It struggled constantly, and its wings fluttered as it attempted to free itself. However, its efforts were futile. Over the next few minutes, the flying yaksha struggled less and less as it gradually lost its strength. As the flying yaksha released its last breath, its head dropped. "Frank, you did it," Lois said with excitement. She rushed toward Frank. Such was the confidence she had in Frank that she took it for granted that he would kill the flying yaksha. Zaid Joe, a disciple of the Brahma sect, also followed Lois and congratulated Frank on his success with cupped fists. "Frank, you are so amazing. You killed such a fierce beast with your spear. Your highly skilled martial arts are worthy of admiration." "That's right, I admire it so much." Yet, the Cloud Hall's disciple, who had just reminded Frank, still frowned as he said coldly, "The flying yaksha is not a particularly powerful fierce beast on the death road. Killing it is not a big deal. The real challenges still await us." Hearing his cold words, Lois was unhappy, and she retorted sharply in a cold tone, "Frank tried his best to kill the flying yaksha, which means that he saved your life. Now, if you are not grateful to him, we'll not take it personally." "What did you mean by what you just said?" Then the Cloud Hall's disciple fell silent for a while before he said, "I'm just telling the truth." At that moment, Zen and his companions also walked toward Frank. Patrick introduced Zen and Rocher to Frank in high spirits. "Frank, they are disciples of my sect. On the death road, with their help." Without waiting for Patrick to finish, Frank nodded and broke in, "I understand. Now, follow me, and I will protect you all. But remember, don't move out of my protection area." Hearing that, Patrick slightly frowned, while Rocher and Zen also wore a heavy face. "Although this guy is not a bad person and his strength is also strong, he is just too cocky, which makes me deeply annoyed." They all held such thought at that moment. Just as Rocher was about to say something, Zen smiled and once again stopped him. "The death road is full of threats. I'd like to see how far Frank can go. We will always find opportunities to prove our strength. Not to rush." Zen's mind was racing fast. Frank did not pay attention to the expressions of Rocher and his companions. He shook his long spear, threw the flying yaksha's body on the ground, and launched a spear attack toward the flying yaksha's chest. After the spear cut through, a demon core fell out of its chest. The demon core of a fierce beast was precious. Frank would never miss the opportunity to collect one. After disposing of the flying yaksha's body, Frank continued his journey on the death road, followed by Lois and Zaid. Rocher's pride led him to believe that they would have managed fine on the death road without Frank. He was convinced that Frank was not the only one who could pass the tests on the death road. However, since Zen insisted that they put up with Frank's attitude and follow him, Rocher had no choice but to go along. As for Louis, his original purpose was not very clear. Thus, he didn't overthink Frank's attitude and followed him like the other people. After everyone set out, the Cloud Hall's disciple standing in situ suddenly raised his head, smiled strangely in a certain direction, and then stretched his hand to squeeze something hard between his fingers in the air, as if he were crumbling something into pieces. Then he clapped his hands gently and followed the others. The action resulted in the disappearance of the picture being broadcasted on the picture slab, which was placed at the entrance of the Cloud Road. Chapter 372, A Rare Herb. There was only one picture slab outside the cloud road. Each time one of the leaders wanted to observe a participant, the pictures had to be shifted from one disciple to another. Among all the disciples, Zen Luo and Frank Zhou were the most frequently watched ones. Some time ago when Frank and some other disciples entered Death Road, the picture slab could not track them anymore. Lady Long became anxious when she couldn't track her favorite disciples. As the leader of the iridescent sect, she knew of the dangers on Death Road. Over time, not a single disciple who had entered Death Road had survived. What is Frank doing? He's taking Lois to a living prison. Lady Long complained loudly now and then. If she could see the pictures from Death Road, Lady Long might have felt better. But now that Death Road could not be tracked and she could not see anything, Lady Long was worried about Lois. As time passed, Zen, Rocher, and Louis also entered Death Road. This time the picture slab could keep track of them. When Zen met Frank and the other disciples, Fernandez and the others saw Frank on the picture slab. After catching a glimpse of Frank and Lois in the picture, Lady Long felt a little relieved as both of them were safe. Eagerly, Lady Long watched Frank kill the flying yaksha. His demonstration of strength pleased Lady Long tremendously, and she began to speak highly of Frank. However, in the end, the mysterious disciple from Cloud Hall turned his eyes towards the picture slab and flashed them a weird smile. The smile surprised all the sect leaders and Fernandez. How could this disciple from Cloud Hall see the picture slab? The sect leaders watched as the mysterious disciple squeezed the air with 2 fingers. In the next instant, the picture on the picture slab disappeared. How could he interfere with the working of the picture slab? Why did he do that? Fernandez and the sect leaders exchanged puzzled glances. I've never met this disciple in Cloud Hall. Fernandez's face paled. Having led all the disciples from Cloud Hall to the trial, Fernandez had attended the roll call and seen each of the disciples attending the trial. Since Fernandez had an exceptionally good memory, he could remember everyone he had met. But somehow, Fernandez did not recognize this disciple. How did this happen? Who was he? Could he be a disciple from another sect? Lady Long asked with concern. It's impossible. A beginner at the illuminating soul realm cannot cheat me by disguising his appearance. Fernandez shook his head as he did not agree with Lady Long. One of the conditions for entering the trial was that a disciple's strength could not be higher than the 3rd grade of the illuminating soul realm. If a disciple were at a higher grade, the space of the trial would refuse him. If he is a disciple from Cloud Hall, why don't you recognize him? Isn't that strange? Kenneth also felt as though something was wrong about this situation. The 5 sects had only selected a few disciples. While there had been 9 from Red Sect, only 3 disciples had been brought from Cloud Sect. Disciples from other sects could not enter the transmission array, especially in front of the sect heads. Considering the strict conditions for entering the transmission array, it was highly unlikely for a disciple from another sect to mingle in the crowd of disciples from Cloud Hall. Furthermore, the transmission array for Cloud Hall was located at Cloud Hall headquarters. If a disciple with a strength lower than the 3rd grade of the illuminating soul realm were to cheat in Cloud Hall, he would be caught. Thus, the only possibility was that this disciple was from Cloud Hall. Perhaps, he was an ordinary disciple who was not eligible to attend the trial but had entered the transmission array secretly. This was the only logical explanation. However, another question still bothered the leaders. How could he stop the picture slab? Earlier when Fernandez could not track Frank, the leaders had been unable to explain the occurrence. Perhaps, this disciple had done something to prevent it. Even Kenneth or Fernandez would not have been able to interfere with the working on the picture slab just by a hand gesture. Moreover, why did he do that? Fernandez gritted his teeth and tried to ignore what had happened. Since he could not find satisfactory and logical answers to these questions, he turned the picture slab to the other disciples. However, most of them were still discussing how to pass the life road. Fernandez, don't you want to do something about it? Lady Long could not let it go. It is clear that the mysterious disciple intends to do something terrible. How can we just sit here and not take action? Frank is the son of Emmanuel Joe. Fernandez, if something unexpected happens to Frank, how will you explain it to Emmanuel? Although Lady Long was worried about Frank, she cared more about her disciple, Lois. But Lois was not important enough to change Fernandez's decision. So, she mentioned Frank. Fernandez became annoyed with Lady Long's questioning. After all, he had led the disciples into the trial. Now, there was a stranger among them. How would such a mistake reflect on him? Fernandez smiled coldly. Explain. What do you want me to explain to Emmanuel? The reason why his son is not strong enough to pass the trial. Lady Long had no answer for Fernandez. After all, her position was not as high as Fernandez's. Maybe Fernandez was not stronger or at a higher position than Emmanuel. But their difference was negligible. Moreover, Lady Long was unreasonable by forcing Fernandez to do something. The fact was that only disciples no higher than the third grade of the illuminating soul realm could enter the trial. All the people outside the trial could do nothing more than watch. Now, the picture slab could not trace some disciples anymore, so watching them had become impossible. The disciples inside the trial, including Frank, did not know what had happened, of course. 8 disciples moved forward under Frank's leadership. Meanwhile, Patrick told Zen, Rocher, and Louis what had happened before they had arrived. The death road was full of whirlpools. Each vortex was an isolated space with a different path. Sometimes the disciples would encounter 2 or even 3 whirlpools at the same time. The layout of Death Road was so complex that it was a maze. After accidentally trespassing into the home of the flying yakshas, the disciples had found themselves being chased by 3 yakshas. Since 2 were small, Frank had been able to kill them. The big yaksha, however, had been too strong. The disciples had known that a fight between them and the strong yaksha would have attracted other evil animals. So, they ran away as they intended to lure the yaksha into a safer place, where Frank eventually killed it. That disciple from Cloud Hall cautioned us that the yaksha was not the strongest beast on Death Road. If it's true, we will soon encounter more trouble. Patrick shook his head. Death Road was far more challenging than they had expected. The problem was that despite passing through several whirlpools, one by one, it seemed like an endless cycle. They would eventually trespass into another powerful beast's home. If that happened, all of them might end up in a more miserable situation. Who is that disciple from Cloud Hall? Why is he so familiar with Death Road? Zen asked. Patrick shook his head. I don't know. Frank has questioned him several times, but he refuses to reply. As they spoke, Zen studied the disciple from Cloud Hall. He was not tall and looked like an ordinary person. Somehow, Zen felt as though there was something strange about him. But he could not tell what it was. Unexpectedly, the disciple noticed Zen's gaze and turned to look at him. His eyes were deep and calm. How sensitive is he? Zen's heart tightened. The space in which they were walking was dimly lit, and Zen had only glimpsed at the disciple causally. Yet, the disciple still felt Zen's glare. His sensing ability was stronger than Zen's, even though Zen had a strong soul. Just at this moment, Lois spoke, there is another transmission door. It's different from the previous one. We really don't know what is behind it, Zaid, a disciple from the Brahmis sect said fearfully. When chased by the flying yaksha, Zaid had been close to death several times. Luckily, Frank and Patrick had rescued him. Death Road was too dangerous for him. Despite the problems faced, Zaid had gained something precious. The reason why the yaksha had chased them was that he had found a rare herb called the Gelid herb. It had considerable value in the central region. 1 piece of Gelid herb could be sold for 5 supreme life vitality crystals. In the eastern region, that figure would amount to 5 million cubic crystals. Zaid was indeed lucky to have found the herb. When Zaid was picking the Gelid herb, the yaksha discovered them. He was lucky enough to survive the yaksha's attacks. Moreover, other people, including Frank, didn't know that he had successfully collected the Gelid herb. This was also advantageous for Zaid as it meant that Frank was guarding him for free. Zaid was undoubtedly proud of his discovery. Let's go. We have no other choice, Frank said as he walked into the whirlpool first. With a sigh, the other disciples also entered the whirlpool after Frank. It is so cold here. After they exited the whirlpool, a cold air enveloped the disciples. The broken spaces were not very large, so it was hardly windy. But this place seemed to be different. After Louis exited the whirlpool, he shivered and suggested, let's go to another way. This place is very frightening. No one is stopping you from leaving, Frank replied. Louis was stunned. Of course, he would not dare to leave alone. If he did venture out by himself, there would be a slim chance of survival. There's probably something evil here, which is why it is so cold, and the wind is so strong, Patrick said with a serious expression. We have no other choice but to go forward, regardless of whether good luck or bad luck awaits us. Let's go, Frank said, and began walking forward. Considering Frank's calm demeanor and his ability to gather the others, he appeared to have leadership traits. However, deep inside, he also felt alarmed by the situation. But Frank knew that if he showed fear, it would affect how the other disciples perceived him. They might no longer have confidence in him or allow him to lead them unchallenged. Zayd cautiously glanced around him as he followed the other disciples. Suddenly, he noticed something unusual. A black plant, not far from his position, seemed to waver in the wind. The plant emitted a dark light. As it was blackened in a corner, most of the disciples hadn't noticed it. Ever since Zayd discovered the gelid herb, he began paying greater attention to the plants around. Soon, he found another rare herb. Although he didn't know what it was, everything on Death Road was precious. This plant had unique features that Zayd had not heard of before. And so, he thought the plant might also fetch him a good price in the market. Zayd approached the plant without being noticed by the others. He was thrilled with his good luck. Despite being strong and killing a challenging creature by himself, Frank had only got a demon core of the flying yaksha, whereas Zayd had obtained 2 rare herbs. What was even better was that none of the other disciples knew of his luck. If they passed Death Road successfully, he would be the biggest winner. Just as Zayd's hand touched the rare herb, something unexpected happened. Chapter 373, In Despair. Watch out, Zen cried. He was the first person to notice something had gone wrong. When Zen looked back to see what was going on, he saw Zayd bending over to pick up a herb, and right behind him was a dark figure. In one swift movement, a hand turned from the dark mass was suddenly covering Zayd. Everyone turned right away when they heard Zen cry out loud. Zayd looked frightened as he was grabbed by the dark figure. He sprang to his feet right away, but to no avail. The dark figure had already grabbed him by then. Everyone could see Zayd being enveloped by the black mass, which now looked like a black cloth. Zayd tried to wriggle himself free, but the black mass was too strong. Soon, Zayd withered, having exhausted all his energy. The dark figure had enveloped Zayd completely, coughing out only a few bones. Zayd was swallowed by that stuff. Those are his bones, Lewis spewed out, teeth chattering, and eyes filled with fear. He had never seen anything like that before. He never thought it was possible that such a thing could exist, something that could eat up a man in the blink of an eye. It's a dark devil phantom. Everybody, watch your step, the disciple from the cloud hall suddenly raised his voice to remind them. At this moment, everyone just wanted to get rid of the dark figure. They didn't even want to put a name on such a horrible thing. Right now, their priority was to survive. Just a few moments after they were warned, the same kind of dark mass had spread on the ground and was slowly closing in on them. Run, everybody, run, Frank yelled. He looked serious and determined. This unknown dark devil phantom was even more terrifying than the flying yaksha because that evil beast could be killed. Meanwhile, they had no idea what a dark devil phantom was, more so how to destroy it. The dark devil phantom looked like a sticky mass, and Frank didn't even know if it was alive. What use could his spear be? Ah! Lois let out a scream as one of her legs was dragged by the dark devil phantom. Frank gritted his teeth, took his spear out and stabbed it on the dark devil phantom that had a hold on Lois' leg. As soon as the spear touched its surface, Frank grabbed Lois and dashed off. At this time, the dark devil phantom had spread majority of its substance on the ground, leaving little room for running. If they stopped, the dark devil phantom might catch them. In a world as small as this, it was not unusual to run into dark devil phantoms. These dark stuff only hunted living creatures, as their vitality was what attracted them. The moment the 8 of them stepped inside this world, the dark devil phantoms already smelled them. They were able to follow them discreetly, since dark devil phantoms moved slowly and took the form of whatever they were in, like thick liquids. Frank, I'm so scared. I don't want to be swallowed up and be left with nothing but bones. Lois screamed as she and Frank raced fast. As the strongest female disciple in the iridescent sect, Lois possessed powerful strength. Unfortunately, women were not as brave as men. When Lois saw what happened with Zayd, she shrank in fear. Don't be scared, I'll protect you, Frank said to comfort Lois. Frank, though, wasn't really sure how they could escape. While his spear skills were undeniably strong, it didn't seem to be doing enough damage on the dark devil phantom. At best, he made a dent on the stuff, but it only grew back, like liquid. The fastest runner among them wasn't Frank, Zen, or not even Rocher, but it was Lewis. He was the quickest of them all, while the most timid too. While they were banned from flying, he maximized his speed by staying afloat as long as possible. Lewis stayed ahead of them until he stopped. He stared ahead and he looked dumbfounded. Just ahead of them were large groups of dark devil phantoms coming towards them. Each one was about 10 feet high and all headed towards them like a moving mountain. Frank, Lois, Zen, and the others had just caught up to him. They felt their insides twist and turn at the sight of this. They realized they were being purposely attacked by the Dark Devil phantoms. They're everywhere. What are we going to do? Rocher asked anxiously. Rocher pulled out his sword and bit his tongue to distract himself with the pain. Zen also unsheathed his sword. He let out a gasp. We have no choice but to fight our way out. Frank remained resolute all throughout as he led the attack. At this point, there was a line of blood splattered across his white spear, and if one looked closely, one could tell that it was in the form of a dragon. Frank built up his strength and aimed it at the mountain of Dark Devil phantoms. Within a split second, a powerful gust of spear energy appeared. It whirled and shot forward. The power of this blow could have destroyed an actual mountain. Swish. Quote, the spear was able to attack 6 Dark Devil phantoms all at once. It created a hole in each of their bodies. According to their power on defense, there was no way they could have countered this attack. However, the Dark Devil phantom wasn't a beast nor a creature, it was a special form of life or a being made of energy. While Frank's attack was extremely powerful, it only took a few seconds for their bodies to heal as if no spear had pierced it before. It didn't work. Physical attacks don't work on them. A dark shadow cast on Frank's face. What a proud man he was. In terms of talent and strength, he was the best among the young generation in the central region. None of his peers in the Cloud Hall could match him. To him, even Lenin, who was known to be the hope of the younger generation under the South Wangzhou family, didn't even hold a candle to him. No matter how difficult it got, he always wore an easy smile on his face as if he lived and breathed hardships and challenges. But for the first time ever, he felt powerless and helpless before the Dark Devil phantoms. He shuddered at the thought of him and Lois dying in this disgusting place, on a pile of bones. Why did I bring Lois here? He asked himself. He realized it was his pride. He was so sure that he could overcome the death road. Overconfidence led to arrogance, and arrogance often led to stupidity. Looks like I'm gonna die here due to my own stupidity. I never should have brought Lois. Frank tightened his grip on Lois' hand as he thought it all over. But he knew it was no use crying over spilt milk. All the others felt their hearts drop when they saw the despair on Frank's face. As the Dark Devil phantoms slowly closed in on them, everyone drew back and formed a circle on their backs. Zen quietly whispered, "Don't give up." The look on Frank's face was enough to keep everyone dejected despite Zen's words of encouragement. Only the disciple from the Cloud Hall stood without a hint of fear on his face. However, he merely stood along with the others, doing nothing too. Rocher, you've learned the Extreme Thunder Sword intent, and the Dark Devil Phantom is a kind of evil thing. All evil things are afraid of the refinement techniques of Thunder attribute. Zen suddenly said. Rocher's eyes lit up. He was just as dejected as everyone else when he saw the look on Frank's face, but Zen was making sense, which to him, was a ray of hope. In fact, Patrick's Green Lotus Karma Fire should have some effect on Dark Devil Phantoms too. Unfortunately, Patrick had already used the Akalanath's shadow once, which prevented him from summoning the Green Lotus Karma Fire again. As Rocher drew his sword, Frank cast a brief glance at him with his dim eyes before shaking his head. Rocher was just a nature creature. Even if he had practiced the refinement technique of Thunder attribute many times before, how effective would his technique be? However, what happened next stunned Frank. When Rocher raised his blood-corroding sword toward the sky, an infinite momentum rushed to his sword, and at the same time, a large amount of heavenly thunder was sucked into it. It's consummate sword intent. Frank muttered. How is it possible? How could a nature creature perform the consummate sword intent? Frank didn't achieve the consummate spear intent until he entered the illuminating soul realm, so he never thought that a guy at the peak of the nature level could master the consummate sword intent. The most amazing thing was that the thunder he drew was not made up of life vitality but heavenly thunder. Heavenly thunder and the thunder that was condensed by life vitality were completely different. The power of the latter could not be compared with that of the former. Frank was astounded. Crackling. The Extreme Thunder Sword intent. Rocher shouted. Heavenly swords. 4 swords in one. Rocher was well aware that these Dark Devil Phantoms were not afraid of physical attacks, and that what could really hurt them was the heavenly thunder in his Extreme Thunder Sword intent. He was already in a state of panic, and he was willing to do whatever he could to destroy the Dark Devil Phantoms. When the Extreme Thunder Sword intent struck 2 Dark Devil Phantoms, they were suddenly enveloped in lightning just as they sparked and evaporated. It worked. A gleam of hope shone across Frank's face. Patrick, this disciple from your cloud sect is really powerful. When Frank saw Rocher's Extreme Thunder Sword intent, He sensed that Rocher would have as much potential as he did after he entered the illuminating soul realm. He had to admit that he had underestimated Rocher. But at the moment, Frank was glad he was wrong. Patrick startled everyone with his comment. Rocher is indeed strong, he chuckled, but Zen is more powerful. Even I'm no match for him, he's the strongest disciple in our sect. What? Frank was so stunned that he had forgotten for a moment that they were in a battle with dark devil phantoms. You mean the guy at the 3rd grade of nature level? Frank asked in disbelief. You think he's better than you? Chapter 374, So Much Life Vitality. Frank had thought that Patrick was the only one strong enough to fight with him. Back then when they were battling the 3 flying yakshas, he used all of his might to not only defeat, but kill a yaksha. Channeling every ounce of strength he had left, he attacked, dodged, and fought against the strongest one. Patrick unleashed the Akalanatha shadow. But the yaksha's defense was so intense that Patrick was still defeated. Patrick gave blow after blow, threw punches against the yaksha, but his defense was too weak. He kept on targeting his enemy's strong body that he forgot to defend his own. As the battle came to an end, the flying yaksha finished Patrick and gave him 3 last blows before he was on the floor, bruised. Although defeated, Frank still believed in Patrick, strength and courage as a fighter. After all, the green locust karma fire was all too powerful. Maybe Frank could easily break Patrick's body in the diamond-like state with his spear, but he could not bear the green locust karma fire Patrick could give off. Comparing warriors of the same level was a very difficult thing to do, let alone fighting off one another just to see who the better warrior was. Would battling it out give the answer? Frank was all too confident, thinking that he would have this one in the bag, that Patrick was just another competitor he would bruise. As for Rocher and Zen, Frank didn't pay attention to them at all as they were at such a lower cultivation level than him and they didn't show their strengths. Seeing the 2 nature creatures, Frank suddenly remembered what Patrick had tried to say to him before. On the death road, with their help. Frank interrupted Patrick at that time as Frank believed that even the most ordinary disciple of the illuminating soul realm was useless and weak. How could those 2 nature creatures be of any help? He had shown his respect to them even when he thought the 2 of them were useless to him. If he had known what would happen later, he should have asked more about them. In this way he would not have been so embarrassed now. The embarrassment was kicking his gut. It was such a shame that Frank was too proud. He had always been like this, even as a little boy. It had now become a trait of his pride. The 2 could have helped him in his time of need. Frank felt his face slightly flush out of embarrassment. Rocher's extreme thunder sword intent could kill the dark devil phantoms that were swarming them. With the great power that his sword had, he waved it numerous times to kill his foes. Dark devil phantoms were cut, but there were too many of them. Each time he killed one, more and more came in. Rocher was running out of strength. He battled ferociously against the dark devil phantoms that kept on appearing. He gasped heavily, and dropped to the floor as he could not swing his sword anymore. He could not do it alone, especially when he had just learned the skill. Seeing Rocher become exhausted, the disciples got tensed. Zen, standing in the corner, frowned at the sight of the battle. He thought of ways on how to defeat the phantoms. The dark devil phantom was pure evil. It was pure energy. It didn't have any real body. Zen, pondering a solution, suddenly realized something. If it is a kind of energy, as the life vitality is, can my demonic life vitality swallow it? Zen asked himself inwardly. It was possible. After all, Zen's demonic life vitality was truly remarkable and powerful. His demonic life vitality could turn whatever it swallowed into the same life vitality continuously. If this was true, then they would defeat the dark devil phantoms. Zen raised his hand, waving, and 6 demonic phantoms appeared out of thin air, surrounding him. What is he doing? Frank and the others were surprised at what Zen was doing. As Zen waved his hand, the 6 demonic phantoms appeared to be ready to swallow the dark devil phantoms that were attacking them. Seeing Zen's efforts to try to defeat the dark devil phantoms, Frank thought of his attacks on the dark devil phantom with his spear a moment ago, which didn't work. It's useless, Frank shook his head and thought. He is trying in vain. To Frank, seeing 6 demonic phantoms summoned at once was amazing, but still useless compared to the dark force that was about to swipe them all. Pung, pung, the sound of 6 demonic phantoms colliding with the dark devil phantoms filled the atmosphere. Frank sighed as he had already known it was useless and a waste of time. He now doubted what Patrick had told him about Rocher and Zen. Rocher was definitely strong, but Zen seemed not. Zen, normal attacking is useless to the Dark Devil Phantom. Patrick reminded Zen. I know, Zen nodded. He controlled his 6 demonic phantoms to turn them into pieces and then into demonic life vitality. Swallow. Zen's plan was working. The demonic life vitality could swallow other energy and turn it into life vitality. Zen sensed the changing demonic life vitality in his body. Soon, a smile started to appear on his face. He opened his eyes. I did it. What did you do? Roche asked while panting. Zen didn't reply and just looked at the demonic life vitality with a smile on his face. He could feel his life vitality swallowing the Dark Devil Phantoms. His demonic life vitality was growing. The other disciples were looking at Zen, looking confused. Is Zen crazy? They thought. Suddenly, a huge hole inside a Dark Devil Phantom appeared. Purple life vitality shoot out of it. What's that? Frank asked with his eyes opened wide. All the people, including that mysterious disciple from the Cloud Hall, stared at the life vitality changing right before their eyes. After the first Dark Devil Phantom burst, the other 5 followed. Soon there were great amounts of purple life vitality. The Dark Devil Phantom's Zen's demonic life vitality collided with had disappeared completely. The Dark Devil Phantoms disappeared since they had been swallowed by Zen's life vitality. Zen waved his hand in the air and the 6 clouds of demonic life vitality gathered together and formed a huge cloud with a diameter more than 100 feet long. Zen shouted, "Go!" Dark purple arrows of life vitality were continuously shot from the super huge cloud of demonic life vitality. Zen never conceived an arrow before, so the arrow was heterocircle, very unequal. But it didn't matter. What was more important was that there were great amounts of arrows. That purple life vitality is Zen's. How did he do it? Frank was puzzled and asked himself silently. In his eyes, Zen just did an amazing thing. He did not understand it at all. Seeing and facing something one could not understand, he would feel amazed. Frank was amazed now. Lois and Louis were also got astonished. They stared at Zen and wondered what had happened after Zen's demonic life vitality rushed inside the Dark Devil Phantoms. Why did the Dark Devil Phantoms disappear? And how did there appear so much extra life vitality all of a sudden? They couldn't believe their eyes. Even that mysterious disciple from the Cloud Hall seemed to be surprised. He looked at Zen with mixed feelings and spoke in a very soft voice. He is actually practicing Heavenly Ogre Fist. Maybe he can help me. Seeing such an amazing feat from Zen, this reminded Roche and Patrick of something. Zen had already done this when he attended the All Peaks competition. During the fight between Zen and Dick wrote his righteousness song by his life vitality. In the end, the righteousness song was swallowed by Zen's demonic life vitality. It had happened quickly, and only a few people noticed it, including Patrick and Roche. But they couldn't care less and did not pay too much attention to it. Now, Roche and Patrick suddenly realized how overwhelming Zen's life vitality was. What happened next surprised them even more. Under Zen's command, thousands of small arrows were shot into the Dark Devil Phantoms. Then, the Dark Devil Phantoms seemed to have been struck by lightning and stopped moving. The whole area seemed to be frozen and all the Dark Devil Phantoms stopped moving. Frank and other disciples stayed quiet. Looking at what was happening in front of them, they were expecting something to happen. What happened next did not disappoint them. Zen waved his hand again and shouted, "Go!" Soon after, slight sounds of explosion were heard continuously in all directions. Pung, pung, hundreds of Dark Devil Phantoms exploded at the same time and purple demonic life vitality flooded out of the Dark Devil Phantoms. Only one Dark Devil Phantom was enough to make Zen's belly full. Now there were hundreds of Dark Devil Phantoms swallowed by Zen's demonic life vitality. What a great amount of life vitality! The great amounts of demonic life vitality were drifting in the dark sky like huge clouds. There were too much demonic life vitality in the area that if Zen tried to absorb all the demonic life vitality, his body would explode. All of the people looked at the purple life vitality like clouds while quailing. They had never seen such a huge amount of life vitality together like this. The people had never seen anyone who could give off such a great deal of life vitality in a short time. Even the head of the Cloud Hall could not deal with so much life vitality inside the body. After a while, they heard Zen spoke, which made them feel both humored and annoyed. It is a great pity to waste so much life vitality. Chapter 375, Allocation. The purple cloud of life vitality finally dissipated. Everyone's gaze traveled from the sky to the ground, and finally stayed on Zen's face. Unlike the other people present, Roche and Patrick were not so surprised. They had witnessed Zen's magic many times before and knew how outstanding Zen's strength was. Zen had used the demonic life vitality to swallow Dick's righteousness song on the fighting field. However, at that time, the scale and impact weren't as big as they were now. Therefore, they didn't expect that Zen's demonic life vitality could absorb those dark devil phantoms. Not many people had seen the unusual strength of Zen's demonic life vitality, so it was no wonder that they had underestimated him. The leaders of the Imperial Army such as Yolanda and Hugh were the first ones to know it. In addition, Seymour and some other cultivators who had entered the fairy palace before were deeply impressed by Zen's demonic life vitality. However, those soldiers weren't interested in spreading that news. And those cultivators like Seymour had died in the fairy palace and they even didn't have a chance to share it. Therefore, except for Roche and Patrick, Louis, Frank, Lois, and that disciple of Cloud Hall were quite shocked by what happened. Their hearts hammered loudly in their chests as they couldn't believe their eyes. They had never expected for a nature creature to cause this scene. They all lapsed into silence to digest what they just saw. After they had gotten over the initial shock, they started to think about Zen's question. "We do not have a magic weapon to store this extra life vitality. I am afraid that we have to waste it," Lois commented. She knew that there was a magic weapon called the Cup of Life Vitality, which could temporarily store life vitality. However, even when they had one at hand, it wouldn't be of much help since it had a very limited capacity and couldn't store the mass life vitality in front of them. Lois observed the cloud-like life vitality and thought again. "In that case, just let it explode," Zen said lightly with a smile on his face, as if he didn't feel pity about the life vitality being wasted. "Close your eyes." As soon as he stopped talking, the little stars within the demonic life vitality burst one by one. They radiated fierce and dazzling flashes of white light. The speed of the explosion then accelerated, and more than one star exploded at the same time. Such massive life vitality explosions generated bright white light which was shining in the small dark world and made the world as bright as daytime. The white light was so bright that no shadows could be seen. Everyone immediately closed their eyes by reflex because of the strong light. The intense light was even brighter than the sun. Even Zen himself couldn't bear it and shut his eyes as well. The others were shocked again, unlike Zen who just remained calm. These people couldn't help but marvel at the powerful explosion of life vitality. They were afraid that if this kind of power were all channeled to one cultivator, even the cultivator of the internal elixir realm wouldn't be able to resist. How can there be such an abnormal and powerful cultivation method in the world? Is Zen refining a tier 5 cultivation method? However, Cloud Sect is not a top-level sect. So, how could they obtain a tier 5 cultivation method? Frank and others thought in their hearts. They had so many questions but decided to keep them in their minds. At that moment, only one person did not close his eyes. It was that disciple of Cloud Hall. It seemed that he wasn't affected by the intense light. On the contrary, he even widened his eyes and carefully stared at the starlight in the sky. His face had an unreadable look on it. "No, the explosion power is not from the demonic life vitality itself. I can sense the power of stars." Has Zen comprehended the power of stars? How did he get the power of a star and play it to such extent? How did he do it? He thought. Before he could get any answers, he fell into a deep thought. He was right. If Zen relied only on the demonic life vitality, he wouldn't make such big explosions. He did not burst the demonic life vitality like what the others assumed. Instead, he exploded those stars inside the demonic life vitality. Even though the disciple from Cloud Hall had extensive experience and refinement knowledge, he could never know that Zen had obtained the sun-moon stars picture in the fairy palace. No matter what they thought in their minds, the light gradually faded. They opened their eyes when they sensed that the light wasn't that harsh anymore. After that, they noticed that some patches of black objects had appeared on the ground. Those black objects were as soft as cake and were about the size of a human fist. They were scattered everywhere. "What are they?" Louis yelled. He immediately stepped forward and picked one up to examine it. A surprised smile crept up on his lips. These black objects are the same with those in the red treasure boxes in the hidden trial. They can enhance the strength of the soul, Louis said with thinly veiled excitement in his voice. "What? These can enhance the soul?" Frank cocked one eyebrow and asked in surprise. Even someone as proud as he couldn't ignore these black objects if they could really enhance the soul. However, he still had some doubts because these things had spread everywhere here. Are they really so useful as Lewis said? He wondered. Aside from Lewis, Zen also noticed the appearance of these black objects. And he knew more than Lewis. It seemed that these black objects appeared after he had killed the black phantoms. They were almost the same with those in the red treasure boxes. Lewis was very clear about the value of these black objects. They could strengthen the human soul, which was hard to be refined by normal refinement methods or by taking magical pills. Just swallow them and then the people would obtain enormous benefits. It was not hard to imagine how precious they were. However, there was a slight difference between these objects and those in the red treasure boxes. When the black objects in the red treasure boxes appeared, they automatically entered the brain and took effect as if they were living creatures and had their own thoughts. But these black objects now did not automatically do these things. Meanwhile, Lewis had gotten a bit impatient to find out the reason, so he tried to swallow one. Idiot, Zen scolded in his heart. When he was about to stop Lewis, the disciple of Cloud Hall coldly said, "These are the poisonous essences of the dark devil phantoms. If you swallow one directly, it will corrode your organs in 1 second. Try to taste it if you want to die." At that point, the essence of dark devil phantom was already on Lewis' lips. After he heard what the disciple of Cloud Hall had said, he immediately spat it out without hesitation. "Oh, really? How come?" He turned to the disciple of Cloud Hall and asked. "The black object you obtained in the hidden trail is the soul essence. It did come from the same source as these black objects here. The soul essence is the reason why the Cloud Road has the dark devil phantoms. But they have used a secret special method to remove the toxin from the essence of dark devil phantom to make the soul essence," the disciple of Cloud Hall explained coldly. "Does it mean that the hundreds of essence of dark devil phantom here could be refined to around 10 pieces of soul essence?" Zen asked. He was caught by the disciple's words and decided to question him after a quick thought. If a piece of soul essence could have a little increase in the soul power, it meant that if they could refine 10 pieces of soul essence, they could have a considerable increase in the soul power. The disciple of Cloud Sect nodded, which indicated that Zen's assumption was correct. All the people's eyes lit up with pleasant surprise after they had heard these comments. The Death Road was the biggest hidden barrier on the Cloud Road. The most important reason why people chose to enter it was that they hoped to get great opportunities and benefits on the road, even though it might be very dangerous. They knew that the danger and benefits always went hand in hand. Therefore, they started to fight and sometimes, even almost died on the road. However, they hadn't gotten anything good or seen any opportunity, which was the saddest thing for them. Thus, they were ecstatic to see so many pieces of essence of dark devil phantom in this place. What a big opportunity for them. Hope filled them like how the sunshine finally shone in a long, dark night. Although the essences of dark devil phantom had not been refined, their value after being refined was invaluable because of their effects on the soul strength. Even in the central region, pills which could strengthen the soul were rare and mostly were extraordinarily expensive. These pills also had heavy side effects. They would increase the soul strength, but they would bring burden to the human body after being swallowed. Some would even generate toxic objects in the human body which were hard to be cleared of. However, the soul essence in this place could directly increase the strength of the soul by a big volume. If this was not a big opportunity, what else could be called as a big opportunity? A strong soul was good for oneself and did not bring any harm. Those with strong souls could even directly suppress their opponents by their power from the soul with just a thought, even without any movements. Then, how do we allocate them? Frank asked the most essential question. The disciple of Cloud Sect shook his head without any hesitation. "I don't need them," he said nonchalantly. Frank glanced at the disciple of Cloud Sect. This guy knew himself very well. "I did not plan to allocate anything to him. It is good that he said that first," he thought. Lois, Patrick, and Lewis remained silent. Everyone would like to have as many as possible of these good things. However, they didn't help just now. So, they also wondered how they would allocate the black objects. A smile suddenly appeared on Frank's lips when he noticed that everyone kept silent. "I have a proposal. How about 30% to Zen? He made great efforts to get the essence. Then 20% to Rocher, and Lois, Patrick and I evenly split the rest," he said. "How about me?" Lewis asked as his face visibly darkened. Even though he wasn't that brave, he wasn't bad when it came to strength. Frank's proposal left him out, which made him angry. However, Frank didn't seem to notice his dark face. "Except for running away, what else did you do? Why do we need to give anything to you?" Frank sneered coldly. "Are you serious? Do you think that because you're Frank, you can talk nonsense? Louis' voice suddenly changed. It looked like he was replaced by someone else in a split second. His voice became muffled and powerful, and his eyes shone like two glittering rubies. Louis' strength wasn't bad, because he had the dual soul in his body. The second soul was much stronger and did not appear in most of situations unless awakened. If Louis had called out this stronger soul in the second layer of the hidden trial, he would have gotten the treasure box there. However, he chose not to do that, and he didn't have the chance to go back to the second layer after he had fallen from the cliff. However, Frank sneered again when he saw the change in Louis. His white spear suddenly appeared in his hand. It seems that you have concealed your actual strength before. That makes sense. Anyone who dares to enter the death road should have some special strengths. Otherwise, you would have died like Zaid, he said in an icy tone. He added, anyway, what you did before doesn't matter. Now, do you want to challenge me? He was surprised by these people here. They had all showed their optimum strength before him one by one. Rocher was the first, followed by Zen. Now, even the timid Louis had his own secret power. It seemed that Frank had underestimated them before. There were no weak people here. If you do not change the allocation plan, of course I would challenge you. Louis declared. After he said those words, he pulled out a wide machete with a thorny back from his black cloak. When Rocher saw that they were about to fight, he quickly went to stop them. That's enough. Frank, your allocation plan is ridiculous, not to mention that Louis isn't satisfied. Even Zen and I do not agree with you. What do you mean? It was Frank's face that had darkened now. He thought that he was the authority in the team, but now he felt that he had lost control of this temporary group. Or maybe, they had never considered him to be the leader in the first place. They simply didn't think there was a need for one. It had been Frank's own thought all the way. The loss of control made Frank uneasy. As far as he was concerned, such kind of supreme talent like he should be the born leader. He was the one who made decisions every time when he took adventures with other disciples of Cloud Hall. However, two people had expressed their disagreement when he said his plan. That had never happened before. The air was tense among them. Zen glanced at Frank and said, Rocher and I have eliminated the Dark Devil Phantoms here. I only need 50% of them. And I need 20% of them. You can split the balance among yourselves, Rocher followed. Meanwhile, Patrick didn't say anything. However, he agreed more with Zen's plan. Whoever contributed the most efforts should be given the most. They would all have been killed if it weren't for Zen and Rocher. In that case, nothing was to be allocated. Chapter 376, Floating Stones. If Zen and Rocher took 70% of the Devil Phantom essences, and even if the man from Cloud Hall didn't take any, the remaining 30% would be divided among 4 people. You two are taking 70%. Do you think Frank and I are just foils for you? Lois asked coldly. The woman was clearly unhappy with the proposal. She strongly believed that the Devil Phantom essences belonged only to Frank and herself. And Frank made sure to express his displeasure as well. Zen, I'll give you 30% on account that you made some contributions. But I wasn't expecting you to be asking for so much, and wanting to take half of the essences. I am not a pushover, or easily persuaded, I tell you. I'm a tough nut to crack. With a sharp look, Zen said, I don't care whether you're soft or tough, anyway. Rocher and I will take 70%, and that's it. Frank signed and a long blood dragon appeared on the white spear hilt in his hand. Waving the spear slightly, he directed its point to the ground. Then solemnly he said, I don't like internal strife. But if anyone in the team tries to stir up trouble and disrupt our harmony, I don't mind teaching him the lesson and making him learn the rules first. When he saw that Frank was poised to fight, Zen also took out his blood-drinking sword. He shook his head and said, Frank, you have good strength, but if you think you can become a leader with your strength alone, I can only say that you're too arrogant. Once he finished speaking, the consummate sword intent began to gather on the blood-drinking sword. The consummate sword intent was like a little spirit that danced happily on the point of Zen's sword. Meanwhile, Rocher came to stand by Zen and also summoned his consummate sword intent. They both have consummate sword intent, Frank thought. His eyebrows shot upward at the sight of the sword intent on Zen's blood-drinking sword. Frank might be arrogant, but he was not a fool. Rocher alone was already a threat to him. And here came Zen, who was even more powerful than Patrick. It was disconcerting to find out that Zen had the eerie purple-black life vitality, and now he also learned the young disciple had the ability to condense consummate sword intent. All this made Frank a little uneasy. If he had a one-on-one fight with Zen at this point, Frank was unsure that he could definitely beat the young warrior. Now with Rocher thrown into the mix, the situation was tougher. As Frank continued to hesitate, Lewis went to Zen's side and in his deep voice he said, "I agree with Zen's proposal. If you have any issues with it, we can solve it through a fight." There was silence. Since Patrick didn't seem to have any intention of getting into a fight, and the man from Cloud Hall also didn't say anything, the arrogant Frank finally caved in and lowered his head in embarrassment. Frank had never caved into anything throughout his life. Though a small concession, it was still difficult for Frank to accept the truth. The real problem was that in this situation, he was at a gross disadvantage. Even if he had taken the entire Devil Phantom essences, they still had to find their way out of this death road. It was probably unwise for him to battle 3 people at the same time. "All right, I agree." Frank gritted his teeth. While he nodded, he remained frustrated by the situation. Quickly, they picked up the Devil Phantom essences scattered everywhere on the ground. They divided the essences according to the proportion agreed upon, with Zen taking half of them. Watching Zen stuff bunches of Devil Phantom essences into his space ring, Frank could not help but be mad. However, he had no choice but to grind his teeth and accept the situation. Blowing out a breath, Frank thought, "When I get out of Cloud Road and come back to the Cloud Hall, I will make you pay then." His father, Emmanuel, was a member of Cloud Hall. It would be a piece of cake for him to deal with these elite disciples who just recently joined the Cloud Hall. As for the Devil Phantom essences they had taken, Frank would certainly make sure each one of them returned all to him. Every Devil Phantom essence was invaluable, and there were hundreds of it. After dividing the Devil Phantom essences, Frank turned silent. Suddenly, he was no longer commanding and overbearing as he was earlier. As the group continued their journey, Frank didn't lead the team. He and Lois walked together in front, while others followed behind in silence. If not for the fact that the death road was fraught with dangers, the newly established team would have already split apart. Like the man from Cloud Hall said, this small world came to serve the purpose to cultivate those dark devil phantoms. But except for these apparitions, they didn't meet any other beasts in this small world. When they came to the end of the road, a vortex appeared. It was red and looked like balls of fire incessantly rotating. At the sight of the fire-like vortex, the eyes of the Cloud Hall disciple suddenly brightened. On the other hand, everyone else turned vigilant. They had entered different worlds since embarking on their journey on Death Road, with each world full of danger. Just now, everyone almost died. Now, with the red vortex in front of them, how could they not be on high alert? However, since they were already on Death Road, there was no way back. Their only choice was to keep moving forward. "Hey, what does this red vortex represent?" Zen suddenly asked. He was speaking to the man from Cloud Hall. The man, who acted mysteriously and didn't want to reveal his true identity, seemed to know a lot of things about Death Road. From the beginning, his face had no expression. But when he heard Zen's question, all of a sudden, he let out a mysterious laugh and said, "What does it mean?" "We'll know it when we get inside." Before Zen could ask any more questions, the man took a flying leap and jumped into the red vortex. After the man jumped in, the world they were in suddenly started to shake. Zen raised his head and looked at the sky. There appeared several cracks there. The cracks were similar to what he had seen on Cloud Road. These were signs that the small world was ready to break into pieces. "Quick, let's get inside," Zen commanded. He jumped in without hesitating. Then Rocher, Patrick, Frank, and Lois all followed and leapt into the red vortex. When Zen got out of the vortex, his head was down as he fell. So it was quite strange that he could see no ground, and he just kept on falling downward. Swoosh! The wind whooshed past Zen's ears. Then he saw the Cloud Hall disciple also fall from the air. At the same time, he found the vortex's exit, which was situated above the abyss. The abyss below was dark and seemed bottomless. Nobody knew how deep it was. But if they continued to fall like this, death would probably be the end of them. Soon, however, Zen found several stones floating in the air. The objects were irregular in shape. Some were as big as a table, while others were only the size of a fist. No one knew what kind of force would keep them afloat because none of them was affected by gravity at all. "The stones are only good for jumping on," the young warrior murmured to himself. As the thought crossed his mind, Zen saw the Cloud Hall disciple suddenly gain momentum in the air through leaping. He twirled his body before being able to stand steadily on a floating stone. Because of excellent dexterity, the Cloud Hall disciple finished with a fantastic landing. His bodily movement skill was even more perfect than Lewis. And Zen followed suit by doing a backflip to change his position in the air. He came at one of the floating stones and attempted to snatch it. Unfortunately, his skills were not as consummate as Lewis. So, the stone began to turn once Zen applied too much force on it. Luckily, however, Zen had grasped a corner of the stone. He followed the stone to twirl around until he could steady himself on top of it. Raising his head, Zen saw Frank and Patrick both trying their best to catch a stone. Meanwhile, Lewis slowly resumed his flamboyant manner after getting into the vortex. Taking advantage of his superb technique in bodily movement, he jumped on the floating stones like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Meanwhile, he let out non-stop shrieks to demonstrate that he was affected. After everyone had a stone and stabilized themselves, the Cloud Hall disciple suddenly pointed his finger above and said, "Look, up there. It's the exit of Death Road." When people heard him, they were delighted. They all raised their heads and followed the direction of his finger. They could see floating stones everywhere in the abyss. At the top of the abyss was a bright light. They could even see shattered floating remnants there. They only needed to get up there, with the help of the stones, to safely leave the Death Road. Finally seeing the silver lining made them glad. However, there was also a bit of disappointment. They took the risk to brave the Death Road hoping for a bigger reward. But in truth, they were only able to take away a portion of the Devil Phantom essences. And they were far from satisfied with it. For now, survival was the priority. And coming out of Death Road alive would make them all heroes. Giggling, Lewis remarked, "It's not as difficult as it seems." He stepped on a small stone as big as a fist and wiggled his body as if playing in a variety show. What Lewis was doing was showing off his bodily movement skills. The Cloud Hall disciple gently smiled and said, "Not difficult. The difficult challenges will come soon enough." As soon as he finished speaking, they heard several unmistakable booming sounds in the air. A loud bang, bang, bang filled the air. "Look down there," Patrick shouted as he pointed at the black abyss below. A tremendous head was now approaching. It turned out to be the head of a colossal flood dragon. But why was its head so huge? The head alone seemed to have filled the whole abyss. And there were big chains on the flood dragon's head. The clinking sound everyone was hearing came from the chains. "It's the flood dragon. Go up quickly," came a warning shout. At the warning, Frank lifted Lois, and they both jumped up onto the floating stones as they darted upward at lightning speed. Nothing frightened them as much as the enormous flood dragon. Though not a legendary beast, there were two notable things about the flood dragon: it was related to the genuine dragon, and it had dragon blood. During the All Peaks competition, Jacques amazed everyone with the power that emitted from a flood dragon bone in his hand. Now, the creature right below them was a living and grown-up flood dragon, and no one knew how many millennia it had lived. And with merely a howl, that size of a flood dragon was enough to turn anyone into ashes, completely obliterating them. "Up, up, up," they screamed. Every person scrambled to safety without a moment's hesitation. To accomplish this, they stepped on the floating stones in the hopes they could get rid of the terrifying flood dragon. While all this was happening, the Cloud Hall disciple had fixed his eyes on Frank. Then he frowned while thinking. Not long after, he finally shifted his gaze from Frank and settled on Zen. A chilly smile broke the Cloud Hall disciple's face to indicate his satisfaction after he had identified Zen as his target. Then before the young disciple could react, he was running toward Zen at what seemed like 5 or 6 times the normal speed. What was it like to enhance one's speed by 5 or even 6 times? Even before, the Cloud Hall disciple was already a lot faster than Lewis, who had good bodily movement skills. But now, his speed surged 5 or 6 times faster, and that meant one could hardly catch his shadow with the naked eye when he was moving. Intent on sprinting up to the top, Zen was surprised when he suddenly heard a swishing sound coming from below. A hidden weapon slicing through the air was the only thing capable of making such whistling sounds. But when Zen turned his head around, he saw that it was the Cloud Hall disciple who came at him. "Wow, that speed is so incredible. How did he do that?" Zen muttered in surprise. Unable to believe that the man was coming at him, Zen furrowed his brows. "Is he looking for trouble with me?" he wondered aloud. Right from the start, they had been on guard against this mysterious Cloud Hall disciple. But since he never showed any wicked intentions, they reluctantly allowed him to tag along with them. Sensing that the Cloud Hall disciple was about to attack him after he stepped on the floating stone, Zen whirled and ended up with his sword pointed at the man. The movement he executed was downward chop of the basic swordsmanship. Since you want to cause me trouble, you'd better be prepared to die, the young warrior declared. With the flood dragon in hot pursuit, Zen couldn't afford any mishaps. It was too dangerous, and even a small mistake could mean paying with his life. Thus, Zen had to go all out to get rid of the people who stood in his way. The basic swordsmanship move displayed by Zen confused the Cloud Hall disciple. But after a while, he smiled and without hesitation, grabbed Zen's blood-drinking sword with his bare hands. The smile didn't escape Zen, who thought it looked weird. It evoked a feeling of fascination as if a gentle lady was the one smiling at him. But the man standing before him was definitely a man. However, there was no time for Zen to ponder on this. He didn't expect the Cloud Hall disciple to use a very clever trick in grabbing his sword. Because of his exceptional strength, even though the disciple was at the beginning level of the illuminating soul realm, Zen was already considered a warrior without a match. He might not be able to thwart Frank's spear attack, but there were other ways to beat him. Although only at the first grade of the illuminating soul realm, the Cloud Hall disciple was brave enough to grab Zen's sword with his bare hands. The move was so daring. It was incredible. The Cloud Hall disciple smiled eerily at Zen, then said softly, "You're going down with me." Before Zen could react, he felt his clothes being dragged down by the Cloud Hall disciple until they fell from the floating stone and into a deep, dark pit. Right below them was the enormous flood dragon, which was rapidly rising, making the situation twice as dangerous. Chapter 377, The Flood Dragon Spirit. Given the current situation, all the disciples were desperately trying to get out of the abyss. So consumed were they about their safety that they didn't worry about how the others were doing. Rocher jumped quickly from one floating rock to another higher floating rock using his sword steps. When he encountered tiny floating stones, he would crush them with his sword intent. As he was nearing a safe distance, Rocher turned to check if his companions were all right. The color drained from his face when Rocher saw that Zen was falling toward the flood dragon. "Zen!" he exclaimed in horror. Rocher's scream attracted the attention of others who were struggling to climb up. They swiveled to see what had happened. Astonishment reflected on their faces when they saw Zen. When Frank noticed that the disciple from Cloud Hall was pulling Zen toward the mouth of the flood dragon, a cold sneer appeared on his face. He had long felt that something was suspicious about the Cloud Hall's disciple. He had even considered the possibility that the disciple was plotting something sinister. As the Cloud Hall's disciple had not done anything unusual and evil, Frank didn't bother to figure out what he was plotting. He had certainly not expected the disciple to become crazy and drag Zen to the flood dragon's mouth. "Zen, you deserve it. Yet, you still have so much dark devil phantom essence. If you die in the abyss, I'm afraid I won't be able to get it. What a great pity that is. Never mind, you are so powerful despite being at the nature level. If in the future, you become an elite disciple of the Cloud Hall, you may be one of my greatest enemies." Thousands of thoughts were running through Frank's mind when he saw the danger Zen was in. Frank, no matter how overconfident he was, had to face these facts. "In that case, the belly of the flood dragon is a good place for your grave." Frank smiled at the thought. As he climbed up, a wide smirk replaced Frank's disgruntled expression. He had been dissatisfied with the earlier distribution of the dark devil phantom essence. But now, the thought of Zen dying pleased him, much like that a warm, spring wind was stroking on his face. Frank did know that he had missed a rather rare chance. If Zen hadn't shown up, this big opportunity would have been his. Unfortunately, Zen's presence changed Frank's destiny forever. To some extent, Frank suffered a significant loss because he was not strong and lucky enough. And since Zen was much stronger and luckier, he was in a position to rob Frank of this opportunity. Meanwhile, Rocher and Patrick were in a bleak mood. They had faced the trials of Cloud Road with Zen. It had never occurred to them that Zen would die here. Zen felt the disciple from Cloud Hall grabbing him as they plummeted toward the flood dragon. Now that the disciple had come closer, Zen wrinkled his nose as a familiar scent enveloped him. At that moment, Zen seemed to recall that the Cloud Hall's disciple walked awkwardly. Somehow, the disciple's gait seemed rather feminine. Thinking of that and the disciple's strange and charming smile along with the familiar fragrance. "That's right, the Cloud Hall's disciple is a woman," Zen concluded. However, at this point, such a conclusion was useless to him. Even though he had figured out that the disciple was a woman, what could he do to her? The colossal flood dragon was at the bottom of the abyss. Since Zen and the disciple were hurtling toward it, the flood dragon kept its mouth open in preparation to swallow them. To Zen, being swallowed alive was a worse fate than falling into the abyss. Why did you have to drag me down? Asked Zen nervously as they fell further into the abyss. The disciple smiled. Her smile confirmed Zen's earlier suspicions. Indeed, this disciple was a woman disguised as a man. Because I chose you. Her voice was as soft and gentle as a summer breeze. What do you mean by that? Zen asked. Unable to understand her cryptic message, bewilderment reflected in his eyes. Zen thought it was a waste of time trying to decipher her puzzling answer when all they had were a few precious moments before they died. I do not know her at all, so there can't be any bad history between us. Why choose me? Why did she pick me to die with her? Zen wondered. The disciple from Cloud Hall said no more. Instead, she pushed Zen under her as they tumbled toward the flood dragon. The flood dragon sensed that they were close enough, so it opened its mouth suddenly and swallowed them in one giant gulp. As soon as the flood dragon closed its mouth, darkness engulfed Zen and the disciple. Subconsciously, Zen clung to the disciple from Cloud Hall. Together, they crashed and tumbled down the insides of the flood dragon. The continuous rolling movement made them dizzy and disoriented. Fortunately, the insides of the flood dragon were soft. As such, Zen and the disciple suffered no injuries from the impact of the fall and the subsequent tumbles. After a while, Zen and the disciple's momentum slowed down before they finally came to a stop. Zen's shoulder collided with something soft. Zen pressed the soft object with his hand and said in a relieved tone, "Well, luckily, the inside parts of the flood dragon are soft. Otherwise, we would have suffered severe injuries from our fall." "Remove your hand," screeched the disciple. At once, Zen felt his arm being grabbed and twisted before he felt himself being thrown away. It was not until Zen landed on another spot that he realized that he hadn't been touching a part of the flood dragon but her breast instead. "You're not pretending anymore. Why do you dress like a man?" asked Zen as he glared in the disciple's direction even though it was dark. The disciple from Cloud Hall snorted coldly. Then a dim light appeared in her hand, illuminating the surroundings at once. To Zen's surprise, she didn't feel the need to hide her identity anymore. Thus, she removed her facial disguise and showed her true self. In the faint light, still dressed in the white robe specially made for Cloud Hall's disciples, the woman appeared almost angelic. Her loose robe did little to hide her well-shaped figure. Her dark hair was casually placed on her left shoulder. Zen admired how natural and attractive she appeared. Even though the light was dim, he could still see her fair skin and beautiful features. She looked gorgeous, even though she was not wearing any makeup or jewelry. Zen was stunned for a while. "You are so beautiful, I don't understand why you're dressed up like a man," Zen said abruptly. "It's none of your business, all right," said the woman coldly. Zen smiled and continued, "You are right. It was not my business. However, you dragged me down here. I believe it's only fair for me to ask for a reasonable explanation. We're stuck inside the flood dragon now, right? Tell me, what exactly were you trying to do? And are you really at the first grade of the illuminating soul realm?" Although the woman's strength appeared to be at the first grade of the illuminating soul realm, a moment ago, she had seen through the secret hidden in his basic swordplay skills within seconds. What was more surprising was that she had broken his swordplay using only her hands. This was impossible for disciples whose strength was only at the first grade of the illuminating soul realm. Isn't Frank supposed to be the strongest participant? He should be the most powerful among the disciples who have just entered the illuminating soul realm. Even compared to the warriors in the central region who have recently advanced to the illuminating soul realm, Frank would rank at the top. It is possible to imagine Frank reacting in an instant. Armed with his long spear, Frank could be powerful enough to break through my basic swordplay. However, it would be impossible for him to make a breakthrough with his bare hands. However, cultivators beyond the third grade of the illuminating soul realm are banned from participating in the Cloud Road test. From this aspect, the woman cannot exceed that level, Zen rationalized. Based on the conflicting details, Zen felt rather confused. Thus, he had to ask the question to clarify his doubts. "You asked a meaningless question. I wouldn't be able to participate in the trials of Cloud Road if I were not at the first grade of the illuminating soul realm," the woman replied coldly. "Then how could you break through my swordplay with your bare hands?" Zen asked, puzzled. "Why should I tell you?" The woman lifted her chin in defiance as she spoke. "Explain why you brought me here, inside the flood dragon." Zen continued. "Why should? I'll tell you later," the woman said as she glared at Zen. Her attractive eyes shone with mischief and radiance. After a while, Zen and the woman felt a violent trembling. Finally, after a loud sound, the shaking stopped. Zen presumed that it was because the flood dragon had rushed to the abyss and then slowly returned to its nest. "Let's move forward," the woman said before turning and walking past Zen. "Where exactly are we going? Are we safe in this flood dragon?" Zen couldn't help but ask with curiosity. "If you don't shut your mouth, I'll never speak to you again." "Just follow me," said the woman as she walked in front of him. Although her voice was cold, it was also silvery and lovely. Zen found himself attracted to her. "At the very least, tell me your name. Otherwise, I won't follow you," Zen said and stopped walking. He knew that the woman seemed to have plans for him, which was why he wouldn't die anytime soon. When she heard his request, the woman thought for a few seconds and then said, "You can call me Tia." "Tia?" Zen asked with a smile. "Yes," she said quickly. With a last glance at Zen, the woman turned and marched forward. To Zen's surprise, the flood dragon's inside seemed to be empty and dry. If it were a live flood dragon, both he and Tia would have landed in its stomach. But under the dim light held up by Tia, Zen discovered that human beings had transformed the inside. Instead of a stomach, Zen and Tia were walking in a palace. At this point, the cyan dragon in Zen's mind spoke with him. This flood dragon was transformed a long while ago. "Don't worry, it is dead." A dead flood dragon? But just now, Zen replied in his mind. "Well, as you can see, it was transformed by humans. They drained its blood and soaked its skin and flesh using a secret method so that its body would not decay. Then they converted it into a puppet," the cyan dragon explained. "Why are you speaking to me after such a long silence? What do you want?" Zen asked bluntly. The cyan dragon in his mind was always in a deep sleep. He would only wake when intrigued by something. Even when Zen was facing a life and death crisis, the cyan dragon would not show. After experiencing this several times, Zen had figured out how the cyan dragon worked. "Ho ho, you sneaky boy." Despite having lived for thousands of years, the cyan dragon had become impervious to sarcasm and lack of respect. He didn't mind that Zen had figured out his character and had spoken in such a direct way. He continued, "The flood dragon's blood was drained a long time ago. Even its bone marrow has been totally absorbed. Thus, its body has no use or value. So low is its value that it cannot be compared to that bone spear made from the flood dragon's bone. At least that bone spear still had the blood of the flood dragon. So, its body is no longer useful to me. However, I can sense that the flood dragon's spirit is hidden somewhere. I want to devour that spirit." "Flood dragon spirit? Didn't you just tell me that the flood dragon died a long time ago?" Zen asked doubtfully. According to Zen's understanding, if the flood dragon's corporeal body had died, its spirit was bound to be gone as well. It's not easy to control a flood dragon puppet. The best way is to extract the flood dragon's spirit, refine it, and seal it in somewhere near the puppet. That's also the most effective way, the cyan dragon explained. Good method. The 6th grade sect had such strength. Not only did it kill this flood dragon, but it also drained its blood, extracted its spirit, and refined it to make a flood dragon puppet. How unusual is that? Is this the work of the Blood Fiend Emperor? Zen wondered. However, I can feel that the seal of the flood dragon's spirit seems to have loosened a bit. The nature of flood dragons is lewd and evil. You and the woman, be careful, the cyan dragon said seriously. Zen nodded slightly as he stared at Tia's back. She was still walking in front of him. After studying her for a while, Zen asked, "I have another question. Do you notice something unusual about her? Why is her strength so terrifying?" Chapter 378, The Treasure Key. "Are you referring to the girl named Tia?" "Well, I noticed her ever since you entered the death road. When compared to you, her strength is immense and extreme. But despite this she must want your help, as she led you to fall from the floating stone along with her," the cyan dragon said in a prophetic manner. "What I truly want to know is why and how did she come to be so strong?" This was now the greatest mystery in Zen's heart, leaving it in a knot weighing him down like an anchor. Why was she so strong as she had just reached the illuminating soul realm? The cyan dragon thought for a long moment before composing his thoughts and saying, "In my opinion, it's likely that she has practiced some unique cultivation methods, such as 9 spirit returning cultivation or 12 turns penencing cultivation. In fact, it's not at all likely that she has just reached the illuminating soul realm." "Really? If that is the case, then how did she enter the cloud road?" Raising his eyebrows, Zen reckoned that it didn't make sense logically. The cyan dragon smiled humbly and said, "This kind of cultivation methods is so powerful that she has to practice anew repeatedly. For example, 9 spirit returning cultivation requires the practitioner to give up his powers, which are brought by his practice, 9 times. And he must restart from low level each time with equal rigor and determination. The practitioner will make a radical breakthrough only after that. It seems not to be the first time she has reached this cultivation level. So, her real level may be the later stage of the internal elixir realm, or even a higher level." The words shocked Zen so much. The later stage of the internal elixir realm, even higher level, was her real level actually possibly that high? This kind of cultivation method is powerful enough to be equal to anything. Once one completes all the practices, his strength would be well over the power of people of the same level. However, each cultivation method requires different boundary conditions to restart. So, I can't know her real level. Although her level has fallen to the illuminating soul realm, her experience, insight, and power are well beyond the usual younger generations, including you. It is not a surprise that she saw through your swordsmanship and destroyed it without even using an actual weapon," said the cyan dragon. After hearing the cyan dragon's words, Zen looked at Tia's lightsome back in awe and admiration. Her level seemed to be higher than that of Elder Faye of the Cloud Hall. Then why on earth did she enter the Cloud Road? Zen made blind and disorderly conjectures behind Tia. At the very same moment, Tia was searching for something in the dim light. After a moment of vigorous hunting, she found out mechanism in the corner. Subsequently, she pressed on it and injected a life vitality. The entire life vitality flowed rapidly along the lines of the mechanism in a symmetrical manner. And soon, the whole interior world of the flood dragon was lit up bright. When Zen raised his head, he saw the whole world inside the flood dragon. As the cyan dragon said, the flood dragon had been transformed. The world now looked like a small palace. After Tia lit up the world, she looked around and said to Zen, "You, follow me." So Zen followed Tia's footsteps. Both of them suddenly heard a click sound just after walking a distance. It seemed that they had opened a mechanism. On both sides of the walls, 6 small doors opened, from which 6 dark golden snakes slowly crawled out. The metallic sheen on these 6 small yet intimidating snakes was the same as that of the puppet killer whom Zen had encountered in the hidden test. The materials used for making them must include the same metal. This shimmering metal was much harder than Zen's streamer sword. There was no way for Zen to destroy this metal with his current level of cultivation, and he knew his bounds well. However, with the broken flying knife's sharpness, Zen was confident about cutting through the metal. But he had no intentions of using it when he was on the Cloud Road. As soon as the 6 snakes appeared, they opened their metal mouths, revealing their dark golden teeth which in a dark twisted manner were appealing. And they rapidly catapulted themselves toward Zen and Tia with strong force. Ding! Ding! Zen instantly drew out his blood-drinking sword as his streamer sword was broken by the puppet killer and smashed the 2 puppet snakes. But even though they fell to the ground as their momentum was broken, they were not hurt at all. As Zen was trying to find a way to destroy the puppet snakes, Tia reached out with one of her hands and caught a puppet snake. Then there was a flash of the life vitality in her hand. She had already torn the puppet snake into 2 with a slight twist of her wrist. Wow! Zen was shocked by her power, which made his heart beat rapidly and muscle tremble. What an immensely horrifying strength! Although Zen had just seen a fraction of the special kind of life vitality she possessed in her hand, her strength was obviously not weak even when considered without the help of the life vitality. Now, there was nothing to do but follow Tia. The remaining several puppet snakes too were grabbed by her bare hands in a similar manner as she tore each snake apart into 2 pieces and threw them away. It looked like she was tearing into noodles, seamlessly. Zen grew happy as he saw Tia throwing the puppet snakes away one by one. It was not only the materials of these puppet snakes alone that had a high value. It was the manufacturing engineering too that added to its high value. When Tia saw Zen collecting all of the puppet snakes, she gave him a scornful look. "You don't have to collect them. If you help me reach my goal, they will hold no value." Faced with her apparent display of dismay and despise, Zen felt a pinch of hurt. But he still continued collecting the bodies of the 6 puppet snakes into his space ring before following Tia. After walking in the world inside the flood dragon for a distance, Zen spotted a red light from not too far away, in which something was fluttering rather violently. Zen curiously asked, "What's that?" "That's the key," Tia said as she spotted the key and accelerated her pace with a happy expression upon seeing her target. Key, what does this key unlock? Zen asked as he approached from behind her. It turned out that the red light was a circular tripod furnace used for refining pills. Now, the tripod furnace was full of fire, in the center of which was a long, narrow and slowly fluttering spar. Was this spar the key that Tia mentioned? The key was used for inheriting the treasures of the whole Cloud Road. Before the destruction of the 6th grade sect, all the treasures were put into the Cloud Road. As long as you get the key, you could obtain all the treasures. Tia looked at the crystal key in the furnace up and down with admiration. Do you really mean all the treasures of the Blood Fiend Emperor? Zen was so shocked that he opened his eyes wide and took a deep breath. It was a 6th grade sect that the Blood Fiend Emperor had, while the Cloud Hall was only a 4th grade sect. It was no wonder that the treasures in the hidden test of the Cloud Road were of such enormous value. The Blood Fiend Emperor might have put part of his treasures into it. The Cloud Road was so long. It was definite that there was bound to be more than one hidden test along the way. How huge would all the treasures be then? A clear look of shock and bewilderment was set all across his face. Tia fixed her eyes on Zen and asked, "Why do you know the Blood Fiend Emperor?" "Ah, that I will never tell you." Tia had many secrets, which gave Zen an idea to do the same thing. Upon hearing what Zen said, Tia did not indulge into a detailed inquiry, but instead continued to stare at the furnace and said, "I have been here once, but I did not get the key. It was far too difficult. Once before." Just thinking about the question, Zen learned the reason almost immediately. According to what the Cyan Dragon said, she needed to practice anew, and not only once. The last time she practiced anew, she sneaked into here secretly. So she was so familiar with the Death Road. Why? Zen looked at the furnace and said. The tripod furnace was way too powerful, and there was an enchantment that I couldn't destroy at the time. Tia stared at Zen with burning eyes and suddenly said, "Didn't you ask me why I brought you here?" This time, I was going to cooperate with Frank. I planned to deal with the tripod furnace with my own power and break the enchantment with Frank's spear. But then I changed my mind. Frank's spear has strong penetrating power, but it might not be able to break it completely. As you have practiced the Heavenly Ogre Fist, and I could provide you with enough life vitality, choosing you is a safer bet for me to ensure success. After hearing what Tia said, Zen finally completely understood her motivation. She was looking for a powerful helper in the cases she alone couldn't obtain the crystal key without any assistance and support. At first, Frank was the best choice. Among the disciples of the Cloud Hall, he was the most powerful. And he majored in spear skills, which had the strongest penetrating power. Using his spear, he would be able to break the enchantment. However, Zen's appearance led Tia to believe that he was more likely to break it than Frank. So he was pulled into the Flood Dragon's mouth. If Zen had not appeared, it would have been Frank that was here at the moment who would have gotten the opportunity. In fact, Zen was slightly perplexed by the facts. With Tia's own mighty strength, couldn't she break the enchantment? However, Zen knew that Tia would never answer this question honestly. So instead he just waited and watched patiently to figure it out for himself. Well, say no more. Just follow my command, take the crystal key. After Tia finished speaking, she sat down on the ground. With a pair of delicate hands placed on her abdomen, she began to gather her life vitality and then pushed it toward the tripod furnace with determination. As Tia's palm winds blew past, the fire in the furnace suddenly burst into raging flames owing to the sudden interference. Soon, a fire flew out, and turned to be the shape of a daunting dragon. Stand aside now. This is a fiery dragon spirit. It is a kind of fiery evil spirit, which is extremely powerful and mighty. This time, Tia carefully and with calculated moves dealt with the fiery dragon spirit with a cautious expression across her delicate face. A piece of sky blue gem appeared as she turned over her hands, which sent out a wave of cold air, and immediately reduced the surroundings' temperature. Tia patted the gem ever so lightly and stretched out one of her delicate fingers. Her fingertip was going round and round over the gem, which seemed like she was guiding something out. Zen saw her finger drawing several small circles and then gently pulled forward. Go. Suddenly, an ice phoenix came out from the gem, which yelped and flew toward the fiery dragon spirit. Chapter 379, I swear. The fiery evil spirits could be divided into various kinds. The ones living in the sea of raging fire weren't really big, but as for this one in the furnace, it was considerably stronger than the typical fiery evil spirits. Even a small fiery dragon spirit which was as big as a man's arm had been condensed from the flames. When it went higher up, the heat that was radiating from it was so insufferable. But as luck would have it, the ice phoenix which had just been released by Tia from her precious gem was just as powerful. As a result, the fiery dragon spirit and the ice phoenix got tangled up with each other, binding and resisting the other. Ice is capable of obliterating fire, while fire, on the other hand, could also melt ice. For every instance that the ice phoenix descended onto the dragon, the heat and light emanating from the fiery dragon spirit seemed to be weakening a little bit. But in that same moment, flame suddenly rose from the furnace, and once it had coalesced into the dragon's body, the heat and light would both be restored in no time. And each time the fire dragon spirit set off for an attack, the ice crystals over the ice phoenix's body got thawed a little, and the phoenix gradually decreased in size. When she noticed that the melting of the ice phoenix had already reached a certain point, Tia instinctively grabbed her precious jade and stroked it with her candle-like fingers. Then, a cold air condensed using the life vitality began to drift away. When the cold air reached the body of the ice phoenix, the phoenix would dramatically increase in size in an instant. The battle between the ice phoenix and the fiery dragon spirit appeared to have reached an impasse. The ice phoenix had Tia's help in replenishing the cold air, while the fiery dragon spirit also had help, for as long as the flame in the furnace didn't die out, the fiery dragon spirit wouldn't die just as well. While I'm fighting against this fiery dragon spirit, you should go ahead and find a way to break the enchanted barrier, Tia relayed over to Zen. The enchanted barrier? Zen asked under his breath. Suddenly, he saw a blanket of dull purple light materialize around the stove. The stove was located in the farthest depths of the body of the flood dragon puppet, and there were several protections surrounding it. Zen began thinking what Tia said was true. If this crystal key was not of great importance, then why would there be a need for placing multiple layers of protection? Clenching his fist, Zen then hit the enchanted barrier as hard as he could, channeling the strength from the dragon scales he had with him. Bang! The sound that was emitted by Zen's fist striking the enchanted barrier seemed as if he had actually hit an iron wall and the barrier still remained unscathed. Relying on your physical strength alone wouldn't be able to cut it, Tia remarked. This isn't just any common enchanted barrier, it has been constructed utilizing the force of space, so basically, it's actually a thin compressed layer of space. Tia's explanation left Zen completely dumbfounded. You mean to say, what I have to do is to break a thin layer of space? Just how am I supposed to pull that off? I hope you're not forgetting that the internal elixir realm is not my specialty. Putting a crack on that thin blanket of space would be quite hard even for a cultivator at the internal elixir realm, shattering it, even more so. Although, it could be possible if a cultivator at a higher level within this realm gave it a shot. Stop overthinking things. Of course, it's not an actual enchanted barrier of space, since the space has just been compressed to a very thin sheet. If it was really an enchanted barrier made from space, there's no way I would have bothered coming here in the first place, because then I'd just be wasting my time from trying to do the impossible. Truth be told, she originally intended to have Frank break the enchanted barrier using his spear. Frank was the best among the warriors she had met prior to that point. The spear's capacity to penetrate something had the greatest force compared to every other weapon. Furthermore, the Spear of Annihilation, the skill which Frank had mastered, had immense power that it had the greatest potential to penetrate the enchanted barrier. Down the line, however, Tia realized that it would be best to choose Zen instead, because he had already cultivated the Heavenly Ogre Fist, an ability which could let him transform the life vitality an immeasurable number of times. And she, fortunately, possessed such an enormous amount of life vitality that could easily be transferred to him. This would be the best time to make use of your Heavenly Ogre Fist. I'm going to transfer my life vitality to you, she instructed. Then, a stream of pure, thick life vitality began pouring towards Zen coming from her hand. Upon seeing the life vitality seeping from her hand, Zen remembered what the Cyan Dragon had told him. Such a dense and powerful life vitality undoubtedly wasn't something a cultivator at the Illuminating Soul realm could possess. Despite the fact that her cultivation level had already been lowered down and her strength was still in a weakened state, she was still significantly much stronger than him. Zen unleashed a demonic phantom at once, allowing the demonic life vitality of the phantom to merge with Tia's life vitality. The instant it was consumed by Zen's demonic life vitality, the color of Tia's life vitality changed into a shade of purple-black. She transferred her life vitality at an intense speed, and Zen's demonic life vitality was reconstructing it at full tilt just as well without having any trouble keeping up with her at all. In just a short period of time, Zen had already produced a mass of purple-black life vitality hanging around him. Isn't that enough already? Zen wondered. The enchanted barrier standing before him was so unyielding. Thank the heavens he hadn't forgotten about his emerald crystal, which happened to be designed for breaking enchanted barriers. Not yet, but we're almost there. Tia kept shaking her head. That's it, just a little bit more. Tia insisted, taking out 4 pieces of supreme life vitality crystals. She clutched the supreme crystals tightly to draw up the life vitality contained within them. The life vitality bottled up inside the supreme crystal was so pure and intense that there was a chance Zen's belly might not be able to handle even one of the crystals' vitality. Even so, Tia was a bit special, for she could absorb 4 at the same time. That being said, it wouldn't be so hard to picture out just how strong her belly's bearing ability truly was. As expected, immediately after absorbing the life vitality from the supreme crystals, she transferred everything again so she could supply Zen with enough force. This was the new plan Tia came up with. There could also be a possibility that Frank's spear might not be able to pierce the enchanted barrier, but Zen's heavenly ogre fist gave them better odds of pulling it off, so long as the power provided by the life vitality was adequate. Zen's demonic life vitality devoured every bit of the life vitality that seeped from her and transformed them into the purple-black form. Just as he was about to drain the last bit of life vitality she had, she took out a few more supreme life vitality crystals, shattering them to absorb the life vitality. The 2 of them kept on doing that repeatedly, and as a result, the demonic life vitality surrounding Zen was gradually getting bigger and bigger. Even though the volume of the demonic life vitality which they transformed this time paled in comparison to the previous one that was made by swallowing up the dark devil phantoms in the small world of the Death Road, it could be said that it was still rather massive. As all of that was happening, the fiery dragon became much more agitated, and its striking power just got even more aggressive. She quickly caught on that she couldn't afford to get distracted any longer, so Tia decided to focus on the battle between her ice phoenix and the fiery dragon spirit. Go now, quickly, smash the enchanted barrier into smithereens. I pray that you succeed. Tia wished Zen luck with a voice filled with anticipation. During her last attempt to do it, she had failed miserably. As she was trying to break the enchanted barrier, the fiery dragon spirit suddenly appeared to throw her into disarray. She brought Zen with her this time as she couldn't handle it alone. She was determined to succeed with his help. Zen stretched out his hands upward and went about condensing the demonic life vitality. The tremendous force that was going to be transmitted by such a rich life vitality should be quite massive. With its help, Zen's power had the potential of becoming stronger than even those of the masters at higher levels of the illuminating soul realm, and it might also achieve the strength of those at the lower levels of internal elixir realm. If he got supplied with enough life vitality continuously, the power resulting from it could last for an indefinite amount of time and be enhanced. Of course, that was what you'd call the ideal state, or at least it was, in theory. This was something that wouldn't really be practical to use in an actual combat though, because rarely would anyone be able to get an opportunity to siphon life vitality from another person, and then there was also the lengthy period of time one would need to spend during the process. And no opponent would ever be foolish enough to just sit back and relax as you prepared for your attack. Nevertheless, that option just so happened to be the perfect one for them to take for the situation they were currently in. Zen was under the assumption that Tia must be quite familiar with how the demonic life vitality worked. His demonic life vitality had been condensed to the extreme, that even the starlights he had been carrying with him got compressed into sparkling diamonds. Break at this instant, gathering up all of his strength into his arm, Zen darted toward the enchanted barrier as fast as he could. Witnessing this much-awaited moment, Tia's heart was pounding like a drum and her breathing pattern had been thrown off due to so much anticipation. This was the moment she had been waiting for. It was a matter of utmost importance in order for her to be the one to inherit the treasures of the 6th grade sect. But Zen's movements suddenly came to a halt while he was still in midair. What's the matter? Why did you stop all of a sudden? With her eyebrows deeply furrowed, Tia questioned him. There's something I've almost forgotten about, Zen replied, appearing to be a bit concerned. And what might that be? Tia pried further, raising her voice. The abrupt change in her mental state caused the form of the ice phoenix to go unstable and start shaking all over. She just didn't have the time to deal with any other problems at such a crucial moment. What if you still decide to kill me once I finally get the key for you? Zen wanted to make sure with a serious tone. There was an instantaneous change in Tia's facial expression. She was visibly quite agitated. However, the question Zen asked was a reasonable one. The warrior's world was well known for its cruelty. You could kill someone for even just a small gain and still no one would even bat an eye. It was nothing out of the usual. What was more, this was a crystal she wanted to get a hold of to acquire the inheritance of a 6th grade sect, something that the cultivators of Central Region would dream to get their hands on. It wouldn't be surprising if Tia tried to kill Zen when she finally got the key. In her eyes, that could be the best course of action to take since dead men told no tales. Zen was just going along with whatever she said, but he was in no way a mere fool, he was far from that. There was no logical reason for him to easily trust a stranger. You don't have to worry about that, I won't kill you. I can even give you something in return to make it worth your while, because I am. Tia stopped in her tracks before she could finish what she was trying to say. A hint of skepticism appeared on her face. It doesn't matter who you are or what it is that you're offering to give me. You have enough reasons to kill me, so it wouldn't be able to guarantee my safety, unless you swear with the will of martial arts, Zen insisted. No one in their right mind would just carelessly swear with the will of martial arts unless it was a matter of utmost importance. Swearing with the will of martial arts was even more powerful compared to swearing to heaven. An oath, pledge, promise, swear, vow or whatever it was that one might refer to it as, God had no interest in such nonsense. But once a warrior had sworn with the will of martial arts, an inner demon would manifest in his heart. If the oath got broken for whatever reason, he could end up being devoured by his inner demon one day. Even if he could somehow manage to hold back the power of the inner demon, it would make it quite difficult for the warrior to improve and attain any further progress in martial arts in the long run. For that very reason, the thought of mindlessly swearing with the will of martial arts scared a lot of warriors because it could very well bring ruin unto themselves. Who do you think you are? Do you see yourself as someone qualified to make me swear to the will of martial arts? Tia's glare was fixated on Zen, jeering at him coldly. Who would have thought he'd be able to come up with such an atrocious idea? Well then, does that mean you don't need me to break down the enchanted barrier anymore? Zen heaved a heavy sigh. How dare you say that to me? Tia yelled at him out of frustration. Shrugging his shoulders to annoy her even further, Zen blurted out in a cold tone, there is nothing I wouldn't dare do. He was aware that he could stay safe inside the flood dragon puppet's body for as long as he didn't do things so hastily. I shouldn't be wasting my time here with her. It would be better for me to just look for a way out and leave as soon as possible, he pondered. Upon noticing that Zen was planning to leave, while still having to deal with the fiery dragon spirit, Tia was thrown into a state of confusion in a blink of an eye. The goal was already within reach, but there was always something that could go wrong along the way. Just a second after watching Zen take a few steps away, Tia clenched her jaw and declared, okay, you win this time. You said your name was Zen, right? Now that I remember your name, I will make sure you'll regret this. But now, you can rest easy. I promise that I won't kill you. I swear this to the will of martial arts. Chapter 380. Snatch my body shell. Zen smiled with satisfaction and said, one more point. I shall take half the heritage of the 6th grade sect. Half. Tia was enraged. Half the heritage of the 6th grade sect. Do you know what that means? You are not able to bear that. It's too much for you. Cloud Hall was merely a 4th grade sect but enough to be highly reputed in the central region. And the only 5th grade sect could rank number 1 in the central region. If this 6th grade sect did not wither away and lasted till now, it was definitely the most highly reputed and all other sects and forces would kneel before them. Though the 6th grade sect founded by the Blood Fiend Emperor had been destroyed, and most of its heritage had been seized as time passed, Cloud Hall could not match the 6th grade's legacy that remained. Apparently, Tia thought Zen was greedy. Zen chuckled. Don't worry, I am a big eater. Of course, you could choose to refuse and deal with that enchanted barrier by yourself. Howl. The fiery dragon spirit roared and knocked the ice phoenix down. The surface ice layer of the ice phoenix turned to steam due to the high temperature. Tia was forced to calm down and deliver freezing air to the ice phoenix via the jade. It seems I have no choice but to reach a compromise with this guy. Tia thought, his condition sounds exorbitant, but how much inheritance could he carry by himself? Perhaps this is not a bad agreement. After all, he is a disciple of Cloud Hall, and he is honorable. After thinking through her options, Tia knew she had no other alternatives. She gnashed her teeth as she replied, okay, I promise. By my will of martial arts, I swear I won't kill you and that I will give you half the heritage. Tia was reluctant. She had schemed and tried several times before coming this far. It was hard to accept that half of her reward would be taken away. Hearing Tia swear by her will of martial arts, Zen smiled, turned, and moved toward the enchanted barrier. He then threw a punch at it. Snicker. The enchanted barrier did not shatter under the impact. However, a red cobweb-like vein spread across it. This barrier was far stronger than Yolanda's. Even though he yielded the energy of the emerald crystal, Zen could only cause such a subtle vein, which was invisible to the naked eye. Emerald energy. Tia was intrigued, and her beautiful eyes reflected the shock she felt. How could this guy summon the energy of an emerald crystal by using his mortal body? Very few people possess an emerald crystal. It has limited usage as well. Thus, it's difficult to get one. Even if people acquire one, they are likely to set it in their weapon. But how can Zen's punch be powered with the energy of an emerald crystal? Did he set the emerald crystal in his body? How could that be? The human body rejects most gems, and some are fatal as they are poisonous. An emerald crystal will affect a human body even if it's non-toxic. But Zen's punch shows the energy of an emerald crystal, which indicates that he must have set it in his body. But how could he utilize and control this energy? His body is not a weapon, after all. Tia was intelligent enough to recognize Zen's cultivation method and identify his basic swordsmanship at first sight. However, she didn't know that Zen's body had become a spiritual weapon. He was a weapon, that was why the emerald crystal could be set in his body. Though shocked, Tia knew she selected the right person to help her break the enchanted barrier. After all, Zen yielded the energy of an emerald crystal. At the same time, she realized she knew little about Zen. The enchanted barrier was so robust that it couldn't be broken by one punch, but one crack was enough. Then, break. This time Zen threw a blow with his right fist. Simultaneously, he released the condensed demonic life vitality. Heavenly Ogre Fist. Having learned from the experience of breaking Yolanda's enchanted barrier, Zen threw this punch at the red cobweb-like vein. The billowy demonic life vitality flowed into the enchanted barrier like a flood. This layer of enchanted barrier contained a hint of spatial power, which was so strong that the enchanted barrier remained intact though Zen had done this much. However, the internal space of the enchanted barrier had filled with demonic life vitality. At this very moment, Zen whispered, "Explode." The starlight mixed with the demonic life vitality exploded, and dazzling light was emitted. Rumble. Cracks finally appeared. These cracks spread, and within seconds, the enchanted barrier collapsed with a loud crash. It is broken. While Zen dealt with the enchanted barrier, Tia battled with the fiery dragon spirit. She was delighted when she heard the barrier break. She pressed down with 2 fingers, and the ice phoenix screeched as it subdued the fiery dragon spirit. At this moment, a flow of purple light rushed into the furnace. It was so fast, yet Zen and Tia recognized it to be a tiny flood dragon. This is the spirit of the flood dragon. Zen, catch it. The cyan dragon's voice exploded in Zen's mind. However, the tiny purple flood dragon was well prepared as it rushed into the furnace as soon as the enchanted barrier broke. What was worse, it carried the crystal key in its tail as it fled. Ahaha, I have the heritage of the 6th grade sect. Using this, I will be able to rebuild my body. I will take back all that I have lost. The flood dragon's spirit cackled as it spoke. Tia became upset when she saw the flood dragon's spirit flying away with the crystal key. She returned the ice phoenix into her jade, ignored the fiery dragon spirit, and turned to chase the flood dragon spirit. Zen followed her as he wanted the crystal key and the flood dragon spirit. However, the two did not notice that the fire extinguished when the fiery dragon spirit returned to the furnace. An instant later, a giant fiery dragon rushed out of the furnace. The fiery dragon spirit grew tenfold before it chased Zen and Tia. Although as tiny as a human's arm, the flood dragon's spirit still flew as fast as before even though it was carrying the crystal key. Fortunately, there was only one long and narrow path through the dragon's body. Thus, the flood dragon's spirit could not shake Zen and Tia quickly. Tia was infuriated with this situation. After innumerable trials and hardships, and compromising with Zen by giving up half the heritage, she had still not achieved her mission. Quickly, she pulled out her jade and crushed it between her fingers. Once the blue jade had crumbled, the phoenix lost its place and began flying around Tia. Tia murmured, "Ice Phoenix. Possess me." The little ice phoenix warbled and rushed toward Tia. Then, she was surrounded by a crystal sheen. It seemed as though she were wearing ice armor. Even a pair of ice phoenix wings sprouted from her back. From under the wings, 2 long phoenix feathers extended to the ground. Overall, Tia looked as though she were wearing a gorgeous evening dress knit from ice. Tia merged with that little ice phoenix, Zen said, astonished. Tia's speed increased manifold. Without waiting for Zen, she doubled her efforts as she chased the flood dragon's spirit. Under normal circumstances, Tia was twice as fast as Lewis. And now, her speed was far more than Zen's, so she left Zen behind as she caught up with the tiny flood dragon's spirit. This was a great chance for the flood dragon's spirit to alter its life. It was not easy for it to escape from the seal, and so, it would not give up easily. Holding the crystal key tightly, it flew as fast as it could. Since spirits had no weight, it wasn't hard for the flood dragon's spirit to gain speed. Zoom, zoom, Tia waved her hand, and a row of ice darts flew to the flood dragon's spirit. The spirit dodged the ice darts. The ice darts missed their target and crashed into the wall. As tremendous ice power was released, the wall became covered with a layer of ice and frost before it cracked. Ice power is horrifying. I'm afraid I will become an ice sculpture if the darts hit me. Zen thought. Though terrifying, the ice power was useless as the flood dragon spirit was extremely nimble. It escaped all the ice darts Tia had thrown at it. However, continually dodging Tia's attacks slowed down the flood dragon spirit. Tia got closer and closer. The flood dragon's spirit realized that it could not get rid of Tia like this. So it swerved into a crevice in the wall. Now that the ice phoenix had possessed her body, Tia could yield its power effectively. She spread her arms, and 2 thin ice swords appeared in her hands. She swung the swords, crumbed wall, and rushed into the hole. Zen saw what Tia had done and found himself impressed by her abilities. Without hesitating, he followed her into the crevice. The instant he entered the hole, he felt as though something was wrong. The wall was a part of the flood dragon's flesh. It hadn't been transformed by humans yet. And so, the inner space was still a soft flesh wall. Furthermore, many globoids were floating in the upper space. After looking upwards, Tia said, "You won't escape." Then she jumped and flew to the upper space, the 2 long ice feathers trailing behind her. However, the floating globoids fell at this crucial moment. Tia swiveled her swords spontaneously to cut all the globoids. Sow! The balls burst and released a yellow smog that filled the space. The gas released smelled fishy and sweet and carried the metallic scent of blood. Right after Tia was overwhelmed by the smog, the flood dragon's spirit rushed to Zen and yelled, "I will snatch your body shell first." Hearing this, Zen paused for a while and then replied, "Are you sure you want to snatch my body shell?"